morning, everyone. I'm Rose Ann with Real Progressives, and I hope we have thousands of you watching our presentation today. Why do I say that? I say it because I believe that we have solutions to problems. The Green New Deal, I believe, is our path to progress. And we have some folks here today who can explain that much better than I ever could. I'm just doing a few little housekeeping things before we get started with our presentation today. First of all, the restrooms out the door and to my left. Okay. Thank you, Unitarian Church, for providing us such a great space today. The weather's great, and it hasn't rained in the last couple of days, so I'm very happy. Restrooms, lunch. If anybody would like to order anything for lunch, I have menus. Come and see me. I'll just be right in the back. Tell me what you'd like to order. We'll put in an order, and they will deliver it to us. Okay. And today, this is the first time that I get a chance to introduce the man who's now become a good friend. The guy who taught me that there's something out there we can have not only what we need, but what we deserve. And guess what? We don't have to sit around and eat our peas. Peas are okay. Nothing wrong with them. I also like Brussels sprouts and broccoli, but peas are not my favorite. For any of you who may not have seen a video from our Real Progressives founder, Steve Grumbine, I can't tell you the exact day I saw it. I can't tell you the exact topic he was talking about. But all my life, I knew people did not have to suffer this way. I could try to help them, but you know what? We are society. We're the government. We need to get our priorities in order. And Steve talked about modern monetary theory, and I thought, how in the world did I miss this? I went to college. I went to graduate school. What happened? What went wrong? Why didn't I know about this? This fits in with everything my dad taught me about being kind to people, about being good to people, taking your time and caring about people. And I was hooked. He was number one. Then this young man over here, Professor Fadhel Kaboub, he said some words, and he said, a caring economy. I almost start crying. He's an economist. He knows this. He's not the only one. But he put it into words that touched not only my head, but my heart. We can talk about formulas. We can talk about push-pull, inflation. We could talk about all those things. But we have to get to people where they live. We have to make them care. We have to make them care to learn. And then we can tell those candidates and those politicians, this is what we deserve. This is what we need. You can pay for it. With that, I am going to hand the microphone over to one of our RP, Real Progressive. I still call it television. You can call it YouTube, that's okay. But I still call it, I call it television. Steve's on television, Joy's on television, Fadhel's on television. This is television to me, okay? Joy does a show, and it's called The Savage Joy Show. If you haven't heard her, I hope you will go to our YouTube channel, the Real Progressives YouTube channel, and hear what Joy has to say, learn about the candidates that she interviews, and Joy will be our I'm going to call you a master of ceremonies. I don't like mistress of ceremonies. Master of ceremonies for today, and she will introduce our speakers for the morning and for the afternoon. And what I want more than anything else, I want to meet every single one of you. I want you to have my phone number. I want you to call me. I want us all to get to know each other so we can share our experiences and our power. And with that, Miss Savage Joy Man.
That's quite a build-up. I don't know if I can live up to that. But in good news, I am in a church and I did not burst into flames. That's good. So welcome. Thank you guys so much for coming. This has been a few months in the works. And Rose Ann didn't say it, but she actually came from Las Vegas to be here and to help with this. So my name, as she said, is Joy Marie Mann. I did not call myself Savage Joy. My audience picked that for me because I have no filter, and yeah. So I have a show with Real Progressives. I'm the other live streamer with Steve. And I've interviewed almost 150 candidates, all of which who are progressive. And by progressive, I mean real progressive. I mean progressive, platform. I mean no money in politics, good environmental, history, Medicare for all, true Medicare for all, Green New Deal, these things. So I'm quite thorough when I look for candidates. So I do candidates, public figures, activists. I have debates. I do individual shows discussing current news, even though they usually turn into rants. Yeah, you know. So we'll be live streaming today on our Real Progressives Facebook. I encourage everyone to follow us and share there. Also our YouTube. So your friends who can't join us, who aren't in the area, they'll be able to watch. So today we'll be hearing from Real Progressives founder Steve Grumbine, Fadhel Kaboub, who came here from Ohio. He's a PhD who's a professor of economics in Ohio. We're going to have a video from PhD Delman Coates, who is an economist. He's actually at an event in Chicago, so he couldn't be here, but he made a video specifically for us, just so we can share with everyone. And we have a Green New Deal rally song by Alan Schwartz, and several incredible PA environmentalists I've reached out to. Craig Stevens is one of them. He'll be speaking. So I thought it was imperative we had some PA activists as well, because not many people realize the magnitude of fracking and pipelines that go on in our very own state. We will also have questions after every speaker if you guys want to ask anything. So without further ado, Mr. Steve Grumbine.
Thanks, Joy. So first things first, I want to thank everybody for coming out here. We have not had many opportunities to get outside of the social media world for our own events. And so this is a real breaking moment for us. We've been doing all kinds of things to present modern monetary theory, in particular, the progressive agenda and how to enable it for 5 years almost now. And I'm always shocked when I realize that people haven't heard anything that we've done or they didn't know about us. And a lot of times I'll look and I'll say, well, what did we do differently? What can we do differently? So we decided this was an opportunity. No matter how much we got out here, we knew that we had to do this. We need to tell our communities about how to fund a progressive agenda. And so for me, how many of you all have ever heard of modern monetary theory? Raise your hand. So a lot of times, one of the biggest problems we have in talking about not only our agenda, but how to pay for it. You all remember back in 2015, 2016, when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were talking back and forth, and she laughed at him and said, it's all pie in the sky, and she sort of mocked it. Do you all remember that? Most progressives had no idea how to push back against that. They sat there and felt deflated. They felt defeated. She's laughing at him. Of course, this is pie in the sky. There's no way we could afford such a thing. Well, modern monetary theory is a way of describing the way the economy really works versus the way we've been conditioned to believe it works. And so had we all been aware of how it works, we could have laughed back at Hillary and we could have said, no, this is how it works. Have you ever noticed when the Trump administration recently put forward an $800 billion military budget and then simultaneously cut taxes? Anybody notice that? Did anybody pay attention to that? That was a big deal. Most people probably went out the door. They didn't quite tie the two together. But what we had is a situation where right there in spades, they proved that federal taxes don't pay for spending. It's a big moment that you've got to realize. It's a shocker. And when you talk to people about this stuff, they jump ahead. They always want to start talking about these little details. They want to get into the weeds because we've been conditioned for so long to believe the country's broke, that we can't do nice things, that we've got to eat our peas like Obama told us. Every time they have these sequestrations and these fiscal cliffs and all these, oh my goodness, we're in debt, we're going to die, we're all going to die, and so forth. These things have been planted in our heads for so long that to hear that we can actually pay for every single one of these programs without flinching, it's a bit of a shocker. And so when you have someone as powerful as Hillary Clinton tell the world on national television and at every campaign stop that of course we've got to reduce the deficit. Of course we've got to reduce the national debt. We're taking out a credit card with the People's Republic of China. This is immoral. We're all going to die. Our kids, we're passing on this awful debt to our grandkids. And there's all these questions that I had. It didn't make sense because I came from a Republican background. I came from a right-wing background. And most of what I was concerned about was I didn't want my hard-earned tax dollar funding so-and-so's bad decisions. Have you all heard that before? Y'all have heard that. I mean, every one of us has heard that. And at some level, there's some justice in there when you think about it. You're like, wow, I worked really hard for this money and I don't want to have to give that up for my family. So you start scratching your head and you start saying, well, what's the disconnect here? And you realize when you understand that federal taxes don't actually pay for spending, something different is happening altogether. Something very, very different is happening altogether. And so at Real Progressives, one of the things that we were trying to do was we tried to point the spotlight. Bernie Sanders in the first go-round, in his first trip through this campaign cycle, said that he was going to put up $33 trillion in new spending. Think about that. $33 trillion. That's a lot of money. But he was only offering up $19 trillion in taxes. Where's that other money coming from? Think about it for a minute. It certainly isn't coming from tax dollars, is it? So every time the United States government spends, it spends new money. Every single time the federal government spends, it's a new dollar. So when the government spends, it's the birth of a dollar. When Congress says, we're going to spend this money, they pass a law. Those dollars neither existed nor didn't exist. They come into existence when they issue the directions to the Federal Reserve to make deposits into the Treasury's account. That money is birthed into existence in that moment. And then, when we tax it, that money is taxed out of existence. It's done its job. Because the dollar is nothing more than a tax credit. So when we spend a dollar into the economy, it floats around, people spend it, use it to buy groceries, use it to buy electric, etc. But when we raise taxes, we take money out of the economy. When we lower taxes, we keep money in the economy because the taxes are deleted. So think about it. Democrats have always been out there saying, we need more tax dollars to pay for this. How are we going to raise taxes to pay for things? And the Republicans are always like, we got to cut taxes because, my goodness, we're all going to die. We're all going bankrupt. And so both of them are talking completely incoherently. Neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have it right. And you're like, my goodness, what's going on here? And then you talk to them and they got a million long stories to tell you about how money goes. Oh, we'll start selling fracking and we'll do this and we'll sell that and we'll finance it by banks and we'll get certain percentage loans and all. It's like, no, that's hogwash. That's not how it works at all. The government literally spends money into existence and literally deletes it from existence. It's a circuit. And when that light bulb goes on, you realize that the real constraint that our government has, the real constraint, is not the pieces of paper or the digits they enter at the bank. The real constraint is the real resources. Do we have enough nurses? Do we have enough doctors? Do we have enough x-ray machines? Do we have enough universities? Do we have enough gas? Do we have enough trees? Do we have enough minerals? Do we have enough ponies if we're trying to give every American a pony, as Stephanie Kelton once said? Well, if we breed enough ponies, then we've got enough. So the real resources are what is the real constraint. It's not the dollars. And so they've convinced us, and I'll get to this, this is kind of funny. What they do is they cut the federal government from spending. And if you think of the economy as a bathtub, when the federal government is pouring money into the bathtub, it stays afloat. But if the government pours too much money in the bathtub and it overflows, well, then we've got a problem. Now we've got a situation where maybe the amount we're spending in doesn't match up with the real resources that are for sale, that are for purchase in U.S. dollars. So we have a drain at the bottom. That drain is taxes. And that lets money out of the bathtub, so to speak, water out of the bathtub. Well, we have other things that can drain that water too. Private savings, public savings, like other countries saving, people offshoring their money. That's a leakage That money's leaking out of the bathtub. So somehow or another, we got to keep that level of money in the bathtub at a certain level. And so what do? They cut the spigot off on the federal government spending because we got to reduce the deficit. We got to eat our peas. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with private debt. All of a sudden, we're taking out a credit card. We are taking out a credit card, not the government taking out a credit card from the People's Bank of China. We are taking out a credit card, and we're financing our electric bill. The electric was already expensive. Now we're paying 26% on top of it. All of a sudden, instead of just giving people free college, people are taking on debt, private debt, that they can't pay back. Now all of a sudden, the people are struggling. They've chosen to push us to banks for us to bear the weight of the economy when the federal government is the creator of the U.S. dollar. And I'm going to tell you something. The U.S. dollar is merely a unit of measure. Do you all know what a unit of measure is? A unit of measure is like a foot, an inch, a pound. Dollar is merely a measure. You don't run out of inches. You can't run out of dollars. There is no shortage of dollars. We create them freely. So why would they push us to private banks? So when you hear someone say, I'm a big fan of markets, what they're saying to you is, I'm a big fan of making you go into private debt to afford these things. When you hear someone go out there, we'll use Bernie Sanders as an example. He's saying, I got a simple student loan plan. We're going to just wipe out student debt, period. Not only people at 100,000 or this or that, not Dinkin and Duncan neoliberal stuff. He's saying, I'm going to go ahead and say, we're going to get rid of student debt. Where do you think that money comes from? Keystrokes. It's not somebody's tax dollar paying for it. And this is a really big deal because we're in the middle of a climate crisis right now, which is what this Green New Deal is all about. And if you think about this, this is a really big deal. We can't afford a Green New Deal. Well, we can't afford not to have a Green New Deal. Talk about a debt to our children. What about an uninhabitable planet? That's a debt to our children we can't afford to pay. We can afford to pay any dollar figure you want. We can't afford a planet that we can't survive on. So you need to know how you're going to pay for it, don't you? We Pennsylvanians, we know we've got the lower anthracite region full of coal mining, full of all kinds of other dirty, hard blue-collar work that people have grown up their entire lives doing. Their family did it, their uncle did it, their father did it, their grandfather did it. Generations have done this work, and it's a source of pride to be a miner or to do these jobs. These jobs are not conducive to our long-term survival. So what do you tell these people? You're screwed, man. Get out. You're doing a dumb job. We don't want you working there. You know, and this is what these people hear when they hear a Green New Deal. They hear you're going to take their livelihood from them. They don't hear we're going to save our children. They don't hear we're going to make the planet better. They hear you're taking away my way of life. The very thing that I've got pictures on the wall of every generation of coal miner, and you're going to tell me everything my family did destroyed the planet? Are you kidding me? So there's an inherent bias against this to begin with. So part of the Green New Deal, which Fadhel, I'm sure, will touch on, is what we call a federal job guarantee. And that federal job guarantee is it provides what we call a just transition. Now, all of a sudden, all these jobs that are out there that are really hurting us, there's an opportunity to transition them from work and industry that is bad for our survival and into something and provide them with a roadmap and a pathway to dignity with benefits and a living wage to migrate into new employment, new productive employment that is conducive to our long-term survival in a green economy. you've just eliminated many of their objections. But we got a job guarantee for you. There's a path. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. The federal job guarantee is a very, very core component of modern monetary theory, because the imposition of the tax is what created the very first unemployed person. If you follow me for a second, you'll understand. Warren Mosler talks about this frequently, and Warren Mosler is oftentimes attributed to as the father of modern monetary theory. And what Warren will tell you is that when you impose the tax, people had to do something to pay the tax. Well, what did they do? Well, the king wanted to create a road. The king wanted to create a building. He wanted to create an aqueduct. Goes out to the people, hey, will you guys help me build this road? Will you help me build this aqueduct? Will you be a military dude? Will you go out there and do these things for me? And they're like, yeah, I'm okay on my farm here, kicking spuds and fishing and doing whatever it is that we do back in the day, wearing tunics and stuff like that. And so now you've got people that are like, yeah, I'm okay. The king's like, yeah, I can understand that. And he goes, what if I give you this gold coin? Like, what am I going to do with a gold coin? Doesn't do anything for me. He goes, yeah, you're right. So he stamps his face on it. He says, what if I say you can keep your house if you give me 10 of these gold coins a year? God goes, well, how the heck do I get 10 gold coins? He's like, funny you should ask. I have this aqueduct I want to build. I have this road I want to build. And I'll pay you 15 gold coins with my face stamped on it. Will you do it now? They're like, yeah, let me go work. So now in order to keep their hut or to keep their house or whatever it is, they're paying a tax payable only in the king's gold. That little thing with his face printed on it. Can't pay it in chicken necks, can't pay it in favors, can't pay it in anything else. Modern day, you can't pay it in Bitcoin. That's why Bitcoin is not going to give us a Green New Deal. So, flash forward, the tax is what drives our currency. And it's why our money, I wouldn't say has value, but it's what causes us to require this medium. And so a Green New Deal and these jobs in the local communities and all this stuff, they all come together into this one economic discussion point. How do we pay for it? How do we fund all these things? How do we get green energy? How do we transition to a new economy based on renewable energy and getting rid of all this life-ending stuff, this toxicity? How do we get clean water to people? How do we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure? How do we do all that? And it comes down to knowing that we can afford it, that we can afford to do nice things. We have a caring economy, as Rose said. It's that caring economy. It's that no one has to suffer, that poverty is a political choice. There doesn't need to be those sharp, pointy things along the walls in Harrisburg to block the homeless from laying down on the benches. They don't need to be homeless. We could provide a home as a right. We could provide schooling as a right. We can provide food as a right. We can do all these things. And we can provide jobs in our local communities as a right. When you think about the federal government as the currency issuer, the federal government has powers that you can't imagine. We've been led to believe that it's completely inept, incompetent, incapable of doing any good thing. Libertarians have gone around telling us, we got to make small government. We got to have little government, tiny government. Nothing government does is ever any good. Well, if you starve a program, if you don't fund a program, it's going to be pretty terrible. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be self-fulfilling prophecy. So why do we have to underfund a program? Because you can't find tax dollars? Really? We already know that's a bunch of bullshit. So we know we can fund these programs. We know we can do good things. We know we can do great things, amazing things. We don't have to bargain our children's future away. We don't have to bargain our present away. And so imagine a job guarantee where your local communities, and this is for you Green Party people out there who like local economies, now your local community can decide what jobs they want to do. They can talk about what jobs they want to fund. And the federal government will fund them. Local communities deciding what matters to them. Do you want to fund raising children? Do you want to fund taking care of an elderly relative? Do you want to fund some other program, nonprofits, whatever you want to do? There's a bunch of models out there, but there's only one proper job guarantee, and that's through the MMT lens. And the MMT lens tells us the job guarantee is a guaranteed public option for work. And so when you look at what Real Progressives does, our goal is to make sure you all hold your elected officials accountable for this. Do not let them tell you they're broke. But people like you are a state level, your county level. Where does the money come from at the state and local level? Well, the state and local level are like you and I. We can't create dollars out of thin air. I mean, we could, but we can't create U.S. dollars out of thin air. So what do states and locals do? Well, of course, they cut taxes because to cut taxes brings businesses in. So the race to the bottom begins. We're slashing schools, we're slashing books, we're slashing all the regulations just to bring business in so they can suckle off of our hard-earned tax dollars in this case. And we give them sweetheart deals because we need jobs. And if they're not here, we have no jobs. So we bend over backwards to bring business into our communities. For what? We've been led to believe that without these businesses' benevolence and their goodwill of the rich, without the gods of rich, we can't survive and we can't do nice things. I'm here to tell you we can do nice things in spite of them. Render the rich irrelevant. And we can bypass them and use our power of the purse at the federal government. But the states, we're back to the states. I think Pennsylvania had a $600 million shortfall. $600 million. Where's that coming from? They're going to raise property taxes. They're going to cut school buses. They're going to make people, have 60 kids in a classroom. What are they going to do to come up with a $600 million shortfall? Of course, they're just going to keep slashing and burning. They're going to make sweetheart deals with the gas companies to bring fracking through. They're going to do whatever they can to bring more business through. They have tax dollars to fund the local stuff. So whenever I talk to local activists, unfortunately, their face is pressed so far up against the glass they can't see the big picture. And the big picture is understanding the role of the federal government and the role of the state government and the role of the local government. The funding starts at the Fed. The federal government is the funding source. Your states are strapped because the federal government has told you to eat your peas. We used to have block grants in the 70s that would fund underperforming states that didn't have stuff, so that people weren't left in destitution. They stopped that. So now what do you've got? A more race to the bottom. Look at what Brownback did in Kansas. Destroyed them. Cut the schools. They were using books that were falling. It was horrible. Look at what happens in Pennsylvania. How many of you have children here? Yeah, probably a lot. They have gym class, once every 4 weeks? Oh, you got to bring your gym clothes on the 7th Thursday of the, new moon or something like that. Art class is like the 6th Wednesday and you've got to trace around this. Why not every day? Why not the way it was when we were growing up? There's no more home ec. There's no more driver's ed. There's none of these things that were there back in the day. Why is that? They had to make tough choices. They had to cut programs because they don't have any money. And then you hear the left, which I'm an admitted member of. You hear the left say, well, We're going to do Medicare for all in the state of Washington. We're going to do Medicare for all in the state of California. Now, you haven't been hearing much about my story, except for this time that I've talked to you. But in the short time I've talked to you, you should already know state-based Medicare for all is a bad business. The federal government is the currency issuer. States are currency users. States can go bankrupt. States can screw up bad. And all of a sudden they start driving businesses out when they raise the taxes. And all of a sudden the race to the bottom begins. All of a sudden you got to start making hard choices again. And who suffers? When you reduce the deficit, it's that guy out in the street. It's the poor. And that line keeps creeping up higher and higher until it finally hits you and I. And when it finally hits you and I, then we finally squawk. Unfortunately, we don't squawk when we see it happening to the people at the bottom. We wait till it comes up here to, now it's time to worry about it. Okay. All right. Now it's, okay, this deficit reduction thing's a little bit crazy. Now it hurts. But we need to be caring about it now. Because every one of the deaths from people without health care, that's on us. Every death that comes from climate-related stuff, that's on us. We have the power right now to demand our government serve our needs and to take care of in passing a Green New Deal, to make sure that all these programs are funded, fully funded, and that it should not be on the backs of the people. The government is to serve our needs, the public purpose. And it is important because when I see stuff like this great movement with the Sunrise Movement, these people inspire me so much. They've got so much passion. If we could give them the MMT lens, imagine the damage they could do to the establishment that's keeping us down. I mean, this is where it gets exciting. These kids taking over Nancy Pelosi's office and demanding a Green New Deal, demanding we address this climate emergency. That is power. But they have the same problem the left and Democrats and all the others have had from the dawn of time. They can't answer the question, how are you going to pay for it? And they get bored. Their eyes glaze over and they say, I don't want to, that's that economic thingy. I don't really want to talk about that. It's boring. But it is the thing. It's not something. It's the thing. There is no progressive agenda without MMT. It's just a bunch of, we gave it a good try, guys. We rallied. We fought. But daggone it, they proved we just didn't have enough tax dollars. You ever seen the military? Guys, charge the line. Move. Oh, hold on, guys. Time out. Hey, you guys over there, wait for a minute. We're out of tax dollars? Oh, all right. Hey, guys. Time out, guys. No more bombs. We're good for a little bit. That tank over there can't shoot any more bullets because we're out of tax dollars. Doesn't happen. Does not happen ever. But the minute I say, I'd like to be able to get blood work without paying a premium. We're going to bankrupt the nation, dude. It's over. We can't do it. We can't afford it. I'm here to tell you right now, you can't be the same once you learn this. It changes your life. Because once you realize they've been lying to you, once you realize that they have been misleading you, some of them just out of pure ignorance, like all of us. All of us started from a place of ignorance. This has been going around for 40 years, more. Going back 70s, when we left the gold standard, we have literally, the rich understood what was going on. And that's why you see the gap. Stagnant wages for the bottom, escalating wages at the top. Removing the gold standard was the best thing that ever happened to us, except we didn't understand how to use it. The rich did. And now we're suffering. We're paying the price. They're on their yachts, drinking their Grand Marnier, smoking their Cohibas, and enjoying a leisurely day on a beautiful ocean somewhere. We can't pay our bills. We're struggling. Our kids are going to school with food insecurity. And the poor are dying. People are dying. because we don't understand that we can have nice things. So that's what today is all about for me. That's why we wanted to do this. We want to get in front of every elected official and make sure that they know, make sure that you know at your state level, at your county level, that you all are going to be constantly fighting in the barrel until you get the federal government to spend money on these programs, to fund highways, to fund infrastructure, to fund schools, to fund these things. There's no reason they can't. And to fund a Green New Deal so we survive. All right. With that, two things. I have a podcast that we do. It's called Macro and Cheese, ironically. It's play on words, but the idea here is that we have some of the best and brightest economists in the world come on with us, such as Fadhel Kaboub, who's been on several times, and Stephanie Kelton, Bernie Sanders' chief economist, has been on with us, with Bill Mitchell from Australia, and we've had, you remember the Keating Five back in the day in the savings and loan crisis? We had Bill Black on. He's just released this morning. That was our today's podcast. We release one every Saturday morning. They're worth listening to. If for no other reason, you get to hear it from the experts who are fighting for the very things we're fighting for. You get to hear how they see it, how they want to pay for it, and how we can fight fraud and abuse and disabuse people of the bad notions that they have about how the economy works. So the other thing, and this is my final point, and then I'm going to open up for questions if you want to. Real Progressives just filed for 501c3 status, and we also are in the process of filing 501c4 status. The C4 will be called Real Progress in Action. The C3, which will be a policy pillar to be able to help groups understand policy and understand the implications. These gentlemen like Fadhel write these great white papers, these intense white papers. Well, you're probably never going to read them. So we bring people like him on to talk to you. And so our goal in the policy space is to be able to boil these down for regular people to understand so they have the power to understand how to fight back. The C4, we're going to finally be able to get into the political world a little bit because we've had to dance that line of, hey, you know, we really can't endorse candidates. Hey, we really can't, you know, push on the political side as much. But once we have that, we'll have a lot more flexibility to live in both worlds. And if you see down here, 4 pillars, 7 knowledge areas, 1 extraordinary organization. Our 4 pillars are policy, education, activism, and media. Our 7 knowledge areas are economic justice, environmental and ecological justice, peace with justice, equality with justice, democracy, health and well-being, and technology and innovation. We will be bringing in interns from PhD programs to help us fill out these knowledge areas. And we will be working with local communities, and we'll be setting up chapters throughout the country and around the world to be able to get this knowledge. Because this is not just a U.S. thing. This is a global thing. The global fight against neoliberalism that prevents us from doing nice things. And we want to be the organization that partners with all the other organizations to bring this power. There's a lot of groups out there. And you'll be hearing from one of them, which is Our Money, and Pastor Delman Coates. We're going to play a video from him shortly. And you'll get to hear Fadhel, who is from the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. And he is truly one of my heroes. So I hope you'll enjoy his presentation. I hope you'll enjoy Delman's presentation. And I'm really thankful for you all showing up here. And so with that, does anybody have any questions? Hold on, let's get you a mic. So, where's it's over there. Joy, can you be mic?
Where'd that come from?
Right there.
Oh.
Sure.
So we know climate change is happening rapidly and we need to take action as soon as possible. What do we do if the federal government refuses to take action or refuses to use MMT?
It's a great question. I mean, if they don't use it, I don't know how you get what you need other than the people need to unite. See, this is what I think is really important about what we're doing and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. Because I don't feel like we have time to build a party. I don't feel like we have time to build these external parties. I think we, the people, and, take a hashtag, not me, us. I think that it really comes down to the people being united and really knowing this stuff and fighting back. Think about this. Richard Nixon was not exactly what you would call an environmentalist, right? But yet Richard Nixon passed the FDA. Or EPA, is it? EPA, thank you. And so if you think about that, the people demand things. And when they demand them, and not just 3 people standing on a corner saying we want Medicare, but when we have everyone knowing, when we're out there talking about this constantly, I think that you guys, the Sunrise Movement is my inspiration. I'm so, you guys are my hope. If we can get this economic message to you all, just like you took over Pelosi's office, what if we sat in there with these people and said, we know you can afford this, do it, call their bluff. Call their bluff. How the heck did you fund $800 billion in new military spending, but you can't save us from extinction? Are you kidding me? Where's the escape pod? I want to get on that plane. I mean, what do you got? Silos for you rich people to be in? What are we doing here? Call their bluff. And I think if enough people really understand this, that we have the power to force this to happen. We have to bypass. I mean, look at the mainstream media right now. I feel like I have to take a bath every time I watch TV. It's bad. It doesn't tell the truth. It's completely divorced from reality. So what you all are doing in the Sunrise Movement and what we're doing at Real Progressives and what other groups are doing, we've got to get out of our silos. And I'm really glad that you came. Because if we keep my turf, if you ever saw the movie Warriors from back in the 70s, 80s, you had Cyrus up there, can you dig it? But the idea here is that your little piece of turf, we got these groups out there that are like, well, if I don't have my name at the top of the thing, I'm not coming to their Green New Deal, a path, forward thing. That's pathetic. I'm not going to lie. I might call a Republican out, but you want to see how quick I'll call a lefty out? It'll make your head spin. You let me see a little turf war going on, bam, done. Because we don't have time for it. We can't survive their turf war. So your question is very important. It's up to us. See, the problem is, and I'm going to be really blunt for a minute and forgive me. People are unsure of the MMT thing because they don't understand it. So do you think they're going to be boldly proclaiming it? Probably not. So part of the problem is that people have to understand at a rudimentary level, the government is the currency issuer. Don't let them get you swept up in Illuminati nonsense and all these other spinoramas around the conspiracy land. Fact is, we can afford it. Can I introduce you to Iraq for a minute to prove that we can afford bombs? Let me introduce you to some other things to prove we can afford to survive. And, we block traffic to say this. Why are we not blocking traffic to say, why are you reducing our deficits? Why are you out there lying to us about economics? Why are we not in front of the Federal Reserve screaming? Why are we not out there blocking traffic outside of Congress saying, Article 1, Section 8 says you can pay for this, daggone it. This is where the protest needs to be, because it's not, we all agree, all the left agrees. We got a climate crisis. But we got these sound money finance people on the left that want to tax to pay for things. We want to get a series of public banks to finance it. What the heck is that? We're the currency issuer. What do we need public banks to do it for? Do it. Do it. And do it now. And that's what it comes down to. So, Caleb, right? Thank you, Caleb. I appreciate that. Did that answer your question? Did that answer it? Yeah.
It did, the public pressure, but I guess what could you right now
Organize. I'm not even joking. If the minute you divert your attention to some other thing, people will probably disagree with me on this, and I'm okay with that. But I see the impeachment thing as a huge distraction to our survival. It takes a massive amount of political capital to impeach a sitting president, regardless of whether he's trash or not. It takes outrageous amounts of political capital to do that. And you already know that we are living in a 30-second soundbite culture. So if the only sound bites you're getting are this, survival is at stake. So to me, you got to realize that it's all about redirecting. Guys, eyes up here, over here. Nope, snap. Eyes up here. You got to keep doing it. Eyes up here. And that is going to be painful to people because they like to get distracted. They love their drama. But there's a real drama going on. It's our extinction. So in my opinion, part of your job, part of my job, is to keep going to our membership, keep going to the public saying, folks, stop being distracted. We need to rally on this because this is it, man. This is it. There is no other option. I mean, I'm never going to advocate for violence. That's not my thing at all. I'll always advocate for a peaceful solution. But austerity is murder. Cutting spending is murder. The way there is murder. Not spending on the environment is murder. People, there's environmental racism. There's all kinds of stuff going on that affects the poor. This is murder. So if you don't have that energy for this, if you don't get that this is actually saving lives, then it's going to be, just some silly economic thingy. But if you realize the direct tie-in, remember I said this is real resources. This isn't just pieces of paper. If you don't realize that in order to marshal those real resources, you have to understand the economics. People are going to be distracted. So it's up to guys like you to make it cool with the young kids. Seriously. I'm not joking. They see a guy with a gray beard and they go, that dude doesn't know. He's probably talking about Happy Days or something like that. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Potsy and stuff, right? So it's up to you to make it hip. It's up to you to make it cool. It's up to you to make the people within your peer group understand what you're saying. And every peer group. You know, we have people of all ages in Real Progressives. I mean, we've got Rose here, who's in our C-suite, okay? And she is a few years older than me. And we've got people much younger than me. We've got the full spectrum. And everybody has a message for a different group. But it's the same answer. It's just said differently. So that's our task. We've got to make the people realize that we have the power. I wish there was a better answer than that. The only thing I know of short of that is something I'm not willing to consider right now. So, does anybody else have a question? Hi, what's your name?
My name is Michael. So you mentioned that you believe that different states couldn't implement things like single-payer health care because they don't issue currencies. But what would you say to... I have a pretty loud voice anyway. So what would you say about countries like France, Germany, Netherlands that are in the Eurozone? So they don't control their currency, but they've implemented things like single payer. Obviously, it's hurt places like Greece where they haven't had currency control, but there have been cases where countries don't have currency control, but they're able to do progressive priorities. Thank you.
Yeah, so Fadhel can explain this a lot better than I can, but I'll give it a crack. When you look at the Eurozone in particular, you got to look at who's a net exporter and who's a net importer. The net exporters, like Germany, they can do anything, man. They got it going on because they just keep bringing more money into the country. So they got this robust infrastructure, robust social programs, etc. But you look at Greece, another country in the Eurozone, right? And Greece is unfortunately a net importer. So that means they're spending money outside their zone. And what's happening? They've got to borrow money to survive. So this is why they impose austerity, because they don't have any money and they have no ability to make up for it. It's the same with the states. States that have a huge GDP, if you will, a huge inbound influx of money, they can do all kinds of stuff. But the average of the 50 states, You couldn't do this in Delaware, maybe, or in, Missouri, or maybe in, Michigan. Maybe you can in California. But after a while, what happens when you have an earthquake or two and you have forest fire? I mean, at the end of the day, we need a solution for the whole nation. And one or two states, they're highly dependent on tax revenues and bonds and other things. You have to really look at the solvency of this thing. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not Medicare for all. It's Medicare for us in this little spot. So that's really what it comes down to. I mean, it really takes all of us to be able to pull this train forward. I mean, yeah, there's options for different things at the state level. I'm not saying states can't do anything. What I'm saying is that states as a whole, that's not a good model. All states cannot do that, because just like in the Eurozone, Greece is a net importer, Germany is a net exporter. They have a totally different set of rules. Texas cut the bottom out of their tax structure and lured all these businesses down there. People are thriving, all this stuff in different ways, but yet there's a very, very steep curve on the poverty level. People that are bad are really bad off. So you have to really ask yourself, what is it you're trying to solve? And I'm looking at, we don't have time. We as a nation and as a world, I mean, the earth spins, man. It's like everybody's in this thing together, even though they don't realize it. And so understanding that currency issuer, currency user will really, really help you. And if you want to look something up, look up sectoral balances and Stephanie Kelton. You'll find it incredible, and it'll explain a lot of the stuff. And I'm sure Fadhel can talk about it as well. I hope that answered your question.
No, definitely. I mean, I agree it would be better on a national level, a lot of these big programs, but I also think, like, the Canadian example was single payer was done on a province by province level, and then it became, so I think if there was a good example of a state like California, would probably be the best example, that could implement it as a model. Again, I'm not saying that has to be, but, so that's what I was trying to get at.
So let's look at Puerto Rico and Detroit, Michigan for a minute. Flint, Michigan, more importantly, right? Detroit, they had to sell off their assets to their museums and everything else because they have no inbound tax revenue. So you tell them they can't have health care because they can't afford it. Puerto Rico was just basically sold off to the highest bidder. Come on in and clean up the mess and take on the debt and restructure us and treat us like a third world nation. We could have easily taken care of that with a pen stroke, no problem. And I think that for the bigger picture, you really need to look at solutions. That's a Band-Aid, in my opinion, what you're talking about, state by state. And it's not universal. All states can't do it. That's the take on it. Okay. Does anybody else have? Yes.
There's a book called Jekyll something
Creature from Jekyll Isle.
Is that book saying the same thing you are, or is that totally different?
So, interestingly enough, I can make any bit of history say what I want it to say. So, The Creature from Jekyll Isle is an interesting story. And I would recommend highly, there's part 1 and part 2 episodes with Rohan Gray of the Modern Money Network, is a genius when it comes to the history of all this stuff and breaks it down very, very fine. The Creature from Jekyll Isle talks about all these meetings and the creation of the Federal Reserve and 1913, the Act of 1913. That charter has been changed many, many times over the course of time. There's been times where the Fed has more independence. There's been times when it's been completely reined in. And you can see at the end of the day that the only thing the Fed really has control over right now is interest rates. That's really the only thing that the Fed has. Warren Mosler would tell you that we can boil the Fed down to a spreadsheet. That's really what it does. Because what they've done is they've convinced you the federal government can't spend, and that the only thing we can do is borrow money. And they've got you convinced that the only thing we can do is do these things. So The Creature from Jekyll Isle has been brought out by the Ayn Rand types and all the other libertarians and so forth. You know, Atlas Shrugged all the way to the trash bin with the book. You know, ultimately, the book is used to be a scaremongering thing. The Fed is merely the nation's bank. It was spoken into existence by Congress, and all the conspiracy-laden stuff behind it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, when Congress says spend, they spend. And that's it. Government checks don't bounce. That's what Warren says. So, I don't know. I mean, you can tell a lot of stories about our country. Our country's got many, many, many backdoor dealings and lots of deals with the devil that have happened throughout we don't have a proud history if we really dig deep. But to be fair, it's much ado about nothing. At the end of the day, the Fed serves at Congress's leisure. If Congress wants to change their charter, it can change it like that. It's that simple. It really is. Does anybody else have a question? Okay. Thank you all very much for coming, and I'll hand it back over here to Joy.
So our next guy, should I use, our next speaker is an incredible guy who has taught every single one of us at Real Progressive something worthwhile and something educational, and just a new perspective, because like Steve said, each one of us kind of approaches things differently, but we all come to the same conclusion. So Fadhel Kaboub is a PhD associate professor of economics and at Denison University and the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He also came here from Ohio to be here. And it's funny because every single time someone says Fadhel Kaboub, people are like, I love him. He's just, he's lovable. So please welcome Fadhel.
Is this working?
No, I don't think so.
It's working. All right. I'm going to ask Alan to join me. We're a team. We both came from Ohio this morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So,
please welcome. Actually, can you give your full name? I don't want
Alan
to
Schwartz.
mispronounce it. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here.
Alan's going to sing his presentation.
I'm not going to sing. Alan's going to sing. So I've known Alan for many years in Ohio. Alan is a co-founder of the Newark think tank on poverty, which is not an academic think tank, but it's a think tank in which the experts are people who live and experience poverty. And it's a think tank with the mission to, really investigate and research the root causes of poverty and to advocate for policy solutions. So this was kind of right up my alley in terms of an organization that's really interested not just in Band-Aid solutions. So if somebody's hungry, we got to feed them. If somebody's, needs homes, we need to house them. But that doesn't end homelessness in and of itself. That doesn't end hunger in and of itself. There are much deeper structural issues that need to be addressed. And the think tank is focused on primarily the structural issues, while recognizing that, Band-Aid solutions are obviously just as important. So I'll ask Alan to say a few words about his background and the work of the think tank, and in the context of, how the New Deal came into the discussions with the think tank members in the last couple of years. And then we'll go into the song.
Okay.
So, which is the Green New Deal song.
So, I'm Alan Schwartz, and like some of you I see, I've been an organizer for 50 years or more, 55. And done the labor movement. We work against fracking in Ohio, the immigrant rights, the women's movement, everything. And what I've noticed over my life, stopping the war, doing civil rights, is what Woody Guthrie said, is that a movement that can't sing can't win. And every successful movement I've seen, we need lots of people, right? When singing together, like in a church, is an exercise of power. So we took this song to the steps of the state capitol. We had 400 people rocking out to this song. It was one of the few joint exercises of power in that demonstration. People sat around and listened to speakers for quite a while, but we exercised our power by singing together. And so that's why I wrote a song, because I think this movement's going to grow. And if change in America is going to be democratic, it has to involve a lot of people, right? So by the same token, we decided, I was living in Ohio. Ohio's probably like Pennsylvania. Sort of Rust Belt and rural Pennsylvania is one of the hardest places to organize. I organized in Chicago for 25 years. You can get people on a bus to go downtown to Chicago to city council and demonstrate like that. It's just part of the culture. Not so in Ohio. Probably not so in Pennsylvania, right? People suffer by themselves. They go to church, they suffer. They sit in their living rooms, they suffer. They divert themselves with drugs and media. Organizing is not in their culture. So 5 years ago, we decided, let's see what we can do with that model. And so we started these think tanks. We now have them in 3 Rust Belt cities and in a county, which is a coal county. And we work on affordable housing because we have a huge homelessness problem. We work on getting adequate treatment for the opioid crisis and the meth crisis as well. We work on reentry. 1 in 6 people in Ohio have felony records and suffer incredible discrimination when they get out of jail. So these people are not thinking about the environment, right? They're thinking about the next meal. They're thinking about paying the rent, right? But the only way we can raise these issues of the environment, of all of these things that we want, the good things, as Steve was saying, is to stand shoulder to shoulder with people. I've learned from 50 years you can't shout at them, from across the street. Doesn't work. So when we organize on these belly issues, it's so that we, the middle class career organizers who are doing this, get to talk about the climate, get to talk about where we spend our money, what we do in foreign policy, and talk about the budget. So that's the deal. And we've been trying it for 5 years with mixed results. It's an uphill climb, but if we're going to strip Trump of his base, if we're going to get a new vision for America, if we're going to do this democratically, we can't leave these folks behind. So that's what we've been working on. I play a lot of music with there's no real good, the scientific word is probably Appalachians, right? But nobody uses that word. I play a lot of music with the rednecks and the working people that I work with, which again is so that we can stand shoulder to shoulder with them and raise these issues in some way that says, I honor you. I honor your culture. I honor the problems that you're trying to deal with. At the same time, I'm trying to bring you this new information and these new perspectives. So that's what we're trying to do. Does that do it? Did I forget anything?
Excellent.
Okay. So I'm going to do this song, and I need you to help me sing this song. This is a rally song. You'll notice, because I'm going to work on teaching you the chorus over and over and over again. But what I'd really like is for this song to somehow get into the water stream and for people to start using it everywhere. So before we leave today, if you want to give me or actually if you guys will have a mailing list, I'll send out. There's already a video available. I don't write music, but I can send out the lyrics so that you can give it to your local folk singer and get them doing stuff besides folk songs, right? We have lost the ability in the last couple of decades to do political music of that kind that isn't overproduced. So we need to get that back, right? So that people can sing, exercise their power, their vocal power together, and get that feeling of what it is to stand together, which is why we do it in church, right? All right, so.
We put the lyrics up here.
Oh, you do? Oh, wow. Okay, so I don't need you to sing the verse. I'll do that, and maybe I'll remember the words. But I would like you to do the chorus, and it goes like this. Get the groove going here. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal That's what we need. We need a new deal. Yes, yes, we need a new deal. Come on, you can sing. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. Okay, that was practice. Now for real. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. That's what we need. Dancing is permitted. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. We had the old deal. It was an oil and coal deal. We gotta leave it in the ground. Use solar all around. Save our soul deal. Where you can have a part in God's creation. You can have a part in saving the nation. A new deal. That's what we need. Okay, you got it? We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. What we need, yes, yes, we need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. We had the blue deal. It was a never come true deal. It was vote for me, then we'll see what we can do deal. They tell me to wait, the check's in the mail, but every time I check, I'm just chasing my tail. A new deal, that's what we need. We need a new deal. Oh, I need to hear ya. Need a new deal. There we go. We need a new deal. That's what we need. We need a new deal. Yes, yes, we need a new deal. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. We had their red deal. It was a better off dead deal. It was that trickle on down. Leaves turn brown. We don't need you hanging around. When 26 people own half the wealth, how much money can you use yourself? We need a new deal. That's what we need. Here's your part. We need a new deal. Now you're getting it. I can hear you. We need a new deal. Yes, yes. We need a new deal. New deal indeed. New deal indeed. Yes. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. We need a green deal. Come on, get clean deal. We need an upright, downright, try with all your might deal. Hey, I'm gonna tell you what we can do. We can have those jobs and save the planet too. We need a new deal. That's what we need. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. That's what we need. We need a new deal. Yes, yes. We need a new deal. We need a new deal. A new deal indeed. Hey, I got a job and it just don't pay. There's gotta be a better way. A new deal. That's what we need. Well, I stand with science, I stand with facts. There's no time to wait, it's time to act. We need a new deal. That's what we need. Oh, we need a Green New Deal. That's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. The mic back on? Mic, it's working. I think you cut my mic so I don't sing. So So thank you, Alan, and thank you all for being here. I'm hoping that later when we have the networking session, we'll talk more to Alan about his organizing work in Newark and Central Ohio, and his experience obviously organizing in Chicago and other places. This is really the purpose of this event, is to network and organize and build in our strength. So what I want to do today is go over some of the specifics of the Green New Deal and the MMT framework. How do we pay for all of these progressive, bold policy agendas, and can we afford it? So Steve introduced us to a few of the key talking points of MMT, and I want to start with a little bit of historical examples just to illustrate that we're not inventing anything new, that we're introducing the public to the way the federal government operates financially as opposed to the way states and local municipalities operate. So most of us are very familiar with the narrative because all of us work hard, earn an income, and then spend it to pay for our priorities as a family. Now, I can spend beyond my monthly income only if I borrow from somebody, borrow from a bank, from a friend, and then if I do that, I have a debt, a real financial burden. The only way to pay off my debt is if I work harder, earn higher income in the future, or start tightening my belts financially and spend less to pay my bills. That's the only way to do it for any one of us. The same is true for the local municipality. The municipality, the only way to do it is to tax the local residents to pay for spending. The municipality can also borrow to build a road or to build a police station or whatever it is that the municipality needs to build. But once the municipality borrows, it has a real debt. That's a real financial burden that needs to be paid off in the next few years with higher taxes and less spending. That's the only way to do it for municipalities, for the city, for the state, right? All of us, users of the dollar, users of the currency, we have to follow these sound finance principles. The federal government is not like the rest of us. The federal government is the only entity that can legally issue the US dollar. If any of us tries it, you'll go to prison for a long time. It's illegal for anybody to do that. So the logic of spending for the federal government is the opposite of the logic of spending for us, the users of the currency. So it's a matter of logic. The federal government has to spend money into existence in order for the rest of us to have access to those dollars to spend and borrow and lend to each other, right? So the spending comes first, and then the taxing from the federal government comes at a later date. And it's a matter of logic also. You can't have the federal government tax all the money out of existence. There'll be nothing left for us to use. So it's part of the nature of the federal government or any national government to run a deficit most of the time. And the deficit that the federal government creates every year is the equivalent of the surplus that the non-government sector ends up accumulating. The rest of us, private sector, businesses, companies, and so on. So the logic is the government spends into existence. So we talk about decoupling the spending from the taxing at the federal level, which we can't do at the state and local level. Decoupling meaning these are two important things that the federal government does, and they serve different purposes. They're not linked necessarily in the way we usually think about it. And we always think in terms of taxpayers' money. It pays for the police station and the fire department. And then we translate that into, we pay for the wars and we pay for all the federal government program, which is not true. The best example to illustrate this is World War II and the way the U.S. financed World War II. It was the most expensive endeavor in the history of the U.S., and it came right after the Great Depression. The Great Depression, the most miserable time in U.S. history. There was no money to be taxed during the Great Depression, and there was no money to be borrowed during the Great Depression to pay for World War II. And yet we had this massive spending program that just came into existence out of nowhere. So a lot of people think of, oh, we must have charged taxes to pay for the war, we must have borrowed. That happened during and after the war, not before the war. So imagine the conversations that a lot of people have today about the Green New Deal is too expensive, Medicare for all is too expensive. We should go with something small, incremental, more affordable, tax a little bit so we can have a little bit better healthcare, but not all the way, all of these ambitious programs. Imagining that conversation happening during World War II when the war started. It will be like the U.S. government saying, we can't afford this World War II, it's too expensive. We should start with something small. Let's send 10,000 troops and see if we can scare the Germans away. Let's do it incrementally. Every month send them 5,000 to kill. That's not how you do it, right? It was a national priority. It was an existential global crisis. And it became the top priority of the nation. And we put all the resources into it. What mattered for the World War II effort was not where do we find the tax money? Who do we borrow from? There was nothing. There was no money to be taxed, no money to be borrowed to speak of. So the federal government made it a priority. Congress voted to approve the spending, and the spending happened, and the war effort happened. And the challenge at the time was not finding the money. The challenge was, do we have enough physical resources to win this thing? FDR was asking in the beginning of the war, what does it take to win this thing? And he was told something like 90,000, airplanes at least to get started. He said, how many can we produce? 30,000 max. How many do we produce when we made it a national priority? 180,000, right? The commitment was political commitment to make this a priority and then marshal all the physical resources, all the technology, all the know-how to make it happen. That's why when we talk about the Green New Deal, the climate crisis, we compare this to World War II because we're facing a similar existential crisis and we have to make it a national priority and we know how to pay for it. So during World War II, the spending happened. Thousands of people were hired to produce for the war effort. And then the taxing and borrowing happened during and after the war, not before the war. So millions of people were already getting paid decent wages, right? Producing tanks and airplanes. And now they have money. And now they want to spend it. It's a free country. You can buy a new car, buy a new house, buy whatever you want. But during the war, we've dedicated so much of the physical and labor resources to producing tanks and airplanes to the point where we shut down the production of new cars in Detroit for 3 years just to produce tanks and airplanes. We stopped building new homes because we had everybody producing for the war effort or fighting the war. So there was shortage of new homes, shortage of new cars, shortage of all kinds of things, physical shortage. So those workers now have a decent income. They worked hard for it. They deserve to buy whatever they want. So had they gone out to buy a new car, to buy a new house, it would have driven prices up and would have caused inflation. So that's where the taxing and quote-unquote borrowing came into place. So the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, started selling Treasury bonds. At the time, they marketed them as freedom bonds or war bonds, kind of capitalizing on the patriotic mood of the nation. And it was a way for the Treasury not to borrow money to fund the war. The war was already funded. But the Treasury was selling you a piece of paper and saying, give me $10,000. I promise to pay you back after the war plus interest. In other words, they're saying, give me those $10,000. Don't buy a new car right now. Don't buy a new house right now. Because we can't afford that. We don't have physical resources to build cars in. But postpone your consumption until after the war, and I'll pay you back plus interest. So the government didn't need to borrow money. I mean, if I had access to the printing press, why would I need to borrow my own money from you? I can just spend it, right? So what we call borrowing is really not borrowing in the same sense that you and I borrow from a bank or from a friend. The federal government doesn't need to borrow its own money, but it needs you to postpone consumption for 10 years or 5 years or 20 years or whatever. And it pays you interest for that to incentivize you, right? And there's other purposes for selling bonds, but this is just to illustrate that in World War II, the war borrowing didn't happen before the war. I mean, can you imagine if the federal government says during the Great Depression, we have a war coming up, so we need to borrow money. How much can we raise this month to figure out how much we can, build in resources? That's backwards. That's not how it works. We set the priorities and we know how to pay for them. So the challenge was actually the physical resources to meet the national challenge. In the same way today, tackling the climate crisis and tackling the healthcare crisis and tackling all the challenges, money is the least important problem. It's the physical resources, the productive resources, the skills that need to be marshaled to meet the challenges. I'll give you an example. If we today decide, we convince everybody in DC that access to dental care is a human right and that the federal government will cover it for every single person in this country. Let's say it's agreed. Done. The government is going to pay for it. Pick up the phone, call your dentist, and schedule an appointment. So I call and they say, we'll be happy to take you. This is a human right. It's paid for. The next available appointment is 2035, late January. But they say, if you want to be seen next week, we're happy to do it, but you have to subscribe to this premium gold membership. It costs $10,000 a month. It's exclusive. We didn't fix anything. We just created an inflation problem. We created an exclusive, access to health thing, and we didn't. So what is the issue here? The issue is that we have a shortage of dentists and hygienists and, medical equipment. These are the physical resources that we need to produce. So the right way to address the inflation problem, the right way to address the exclusiveness of certain goods and services in the economy is by, number one, increasing the productive capacity. In other words, we train more doctors and nurses and dentists and invest in research and development and produce more of the equipment that we need for hospitals and so on. And the good news about that is that we have the technology. These things are producible. We can actually hire people to produce more. We can train more people to go through medical schools and engineering schools and whatever. So these technical problems are solvable. We just produce more of it, and that creates more jobs. But if we don't do that and throw money in the economy and say, go spend it, then of course we're going to create more inflation and more exclusive services because we have a physical shortage of these things. So the example that I gave you about World War II is not the only time that the federal government spent that way. That's how the federal government always spends. And that's why when Steve gave the example of military budget and tax cuts, those questions never come up when we have a consensus as a nation that nobody should ever question military budget. It's a national priority. We just pay for it and nobody asks any questions. Nobody says, where's the money coming from? Send me an itemized bill for, my taxes, what part of my taxes go to military spending. Same thing with tax cuts. Where does the money come from? We only ask those questions when it comes to social services and, addressing the needs of people at the bottom. And we say, oh, we can't afford that. Where's the money going to come from to pay for all of that, right? And then we get that rhetoric of taxpayers' money, like Steve said earlier. My tax dollars, I worked really hard for that money. You're taking my money and subsidizing those people who made bad decisions. So we're back into that vicious cycle of tax dollars paying for this. At the state level, yeah, you tax this to pay for that. So we set the priorities straight in our priorities today, and that's why we're using the label of the New Deal, because the New Deal of the 1930s was introduced to deal with very severe structural issues that were facing the U.S. economy at the time. Rampant inequality and mass unemployment and poverty. The Green New Deal is similarly dealing with structural economic issues. Rampant inequality today, the only comparison you can find to it is the 1930s inequality that led to the Great Depression. But the climate crisis that we have. So jobs, poverty, inequality, the economic issues, and the climate challenge that we have today. These are the two core components of the Green New Deal. But then you look at the New Deal resolution, the Green New Deal resolution, and the way we've been advocating for it. A lot of critics say, well, this is like just the long shopping list of the progressive movement. Why don't you guys just deal with the climate stuff? Why don't you just focus on green jobs? And later we'll deal with the healthcare things, and those are separate issues. For us, this is not just a shopping list of the progressive movement. The way it's structured is specifically to deal with the structural issues and to deal with the potential inflation issues and to deal with the power structure issues that are actually causing inflation. So today in the US economy, before we even have a Green New Deal, before we even spend anything, we already have sources of inflation that people feel in their pocketbooks on a regular basis. 4 areas that are actually inflating the cost of living in the US economy. And most of you know this. Can you guess? 4 areas. What are the things that people really struggle with financially? Healthcare. College. That's number 2. Housing. And there's another one. Energy and transportation, right? So those 4 areas, before the Green New Deal, those areas already are inflating and affecting people's quality of life and cost of living as we speak. So if we don't change any of the structure of the economy, if we keep the same engine that the economy is running with today, the engine that's producing poverty, the engine that's producing pollution, the engine that's producing inequality, and we feed it more government spending, we throw more money into that engine, it's going to crank up and produce much faster. It's going to produce more poverty, more inequality, more pollution. So what we're trying to do with the Green New Deal is change the engine so that it produces less pollution, so that it produces more equitable outcomes, so that it produces better paying jobs. So how do we change that without causing inflation? You go to those 4 inflation pressure points that we already have today, and you go after the source of inflation. So why do we have inflation in those areas? Because we have shortage of productive capacity, and because we have powerful interest groups, powerful price setters who actually take advantage of the system and charge higher prices. Think of the health insurance industry. The health insurance industry employs roughly 5 million people. Many of them are neighbors and friends. 5 million people. Their job as a business model, not just as an accident, as a business model, is to charge customers a monthly fee to get health insurance. And when it's time to, have refund for health, expenses, the job of the insurance industry, as much as possible, is to try to deny you coverage. The more they deny you coverage, the more money the business makes. That's just messed up. To have 5 million people in this society employed to pickpocket from you every month, and when it's time for you to need the services, they deny you as much as possible of the coverage. That's just messed up. And it's because they have the power to do that, because we set up a health system to do that. So Steve earlier talked about the job guarantee and the concept of just transition from one job to another with justice. So we're not saying we want to end the livelihood of those 5 million people working in the healthcare industry, health insurance industry. We want to undo that power structure and deliver better healthcare for everybody. But we want also justice for those individuals who now will lose jobs in that industry. And that's why we have a job guarantee with decent wages and benefits, so that we reallocate the labor resources we have in a more efficient way, because the current system is not efficient, right? That's not what efficiency is. So we guarantee a transition with decent wages and benefits and medical health coverage and retirement benefits, because we can afford these things. And we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to need people to help with the transition to this new caring economy that we're talking about. Same thing with the fossil fuel industry. If we want to decarbonize the economy, it's going to displace a lot of people from existing fossil fuel-based jobs. We don't want to end their livelihood, but we want to decarbonize the economy. Well, that's why we have a job guarantee with a just transition for everybody, regardless of experience, regardless of age, regardless of background. We take people as they are, where they are, and we guarantee jobs with on-the-job paid training, right? So we're not going to tell people, oh, you lost your job, you got to move to San Francisco, you need to learn how to code. That's where the jobs are. That's not fair, that's not reasonable. We need to revitalize every single local economy, take people as they are, where they are, and do on-the-job paid training. So every community at the local level We'll look at all the needs, kind of, town hall type of meetings. What are the needs of this community? Make a long list of potential projects. And then look at the list of the local population that needs to, find employment. And then you do a matchmaking process. If the needs of the community and the skills of the community match, then that's perfect. We get federal funding, and we have local participatory democracy where the community decide what needs to be done. They do the hiring, the training, the auditing, participatory budgeting. That's what democracy was supposed to be, participatory democracy. And if the skills and the needs of the community don't match, then that's where on-the-job training comes in. We build skills on the job, and we meet the needs of the community instead of saying, move to San Francisco, that's where the jobs are, and then destroy the local economy, right? So so the job guarantee is not just a nice add-on to the Green New Deal. It's a basic feature of the system. The concept of just transition is not just a nice progressive add-on. It's a basic feature of the Green New Deal. So all of this, bad publicity that you hear about the Green New Deal, is say, oh, they want to destroy your town. They want to destroy all the fracking jobs, and then you're going to be left with nothing. Because that's what people are used to. We destroy jobs and we leave people with nothing. But the Green New Deal is built from within with the job guarantee, with just transition. So we need to fight back against that negative, publicity that people are trying to, throw around about the Green New Deal. So Medicare for all is to undo the power of the health insurance industry and actually provide care as a human right, as a guarantee, and we can afford it. Even when it comes to some of the research that's been thrown around in the media against the Medicare for all, said, oh, it's going to cost $30 trillion in the next 10 years. They forgot to mention that the current system costs $32 trillion in the next 10 years, right? So it's actually deflationary. It's not going to inflate the economy. It's actually saves money. Right? We're talking about the fossil fuel industry, the power of the fossil fuel industry. When we build a 100% renewable energy system, not only are we creating millions of jobs with new skills, decentralized, not all of them located in San Francisco, New York, and every community, but also we're completely insulating the U.S. energy price system from the power of oil companies, from conflicts that happen in the Middle East, from hurricanes that happen in the Gulf of Mexico. So you're building a much more advanced and resilient power grid system, and it's clean. And it's really transitioning us into a new era of economic activity. Right? So these are the important features of the Green New Deal, and they're all creating jobs, and they're all tackling the root causes of inflation that we currently have. So if anything, people say the Green New Deal will be too expensive, it's going to cause hyperinflation. They don't really understand what causes inflation. And they're trying to trick us into thinking that everything that the government spends on will automatically cause inflation. So that's why we say call their bluff. We know that this is not the case. So you have these components, and then access to education and free college education and vocational training is absolutely necessary, because what we're experiencing, we're transitioning into, this idea that you hear about, robots are coming to take your jobs, and there's, automation has taken away your jobs. That's not new. Automation started with the Industrial Revolution, and we've always created new industries, new products, new jobs, but all the new industries and new products and new jobs that were created were always higher levels of skills, technical skills, right? Which means if we're going to face the, oncoming wave of automation, we're not going to face it with less education, with less technical skills. We have to face it with higher levels of education. So this is a national priority to continue moving forward. So when the day comes when the robots are here and starting to, take away some of the jobs, we should be celebrating. We shouldn't be banning robots. Let the robots do all the precarious work, all the dangerous work, all the painful and repetitive work, and let human beings do the dignified work, the fulfilling work, the meaningful work. And that work is mostly in the care economy, caring for people, caring for the planet, caring for the elderly, caring for children. That's the prosperous society we want. And if the robots can do some of the work that, we shouldn't be doing, so be it, right? So the new jobs are not going to be less technical and less skilled. They'll be more sophisticated, right? So investment in education is important. And when we say investment in education as a public investment, we're not saying more student loan debt. I mean, even people who talk about student loan forgiveness, I hear that word and I cringe. It's not forgiveness, it's cancellation. Forgiveness implies you've done something really, really bad, and we're going to forgive you for your sins, for getting an education, for bettering yourself, for investing in our future. It's nonsensical. It's the strangest thing to experience, to have, the student population and the, students who went through college now. We're talking about more than $1.5 trillion worth of student debt. These are my students. They're graduating from college. They're not buying a new car. They're not buying a new house. They're not starting a new business. They're not thinking creatively. They're just hustling for jobs to pay their bills. And that's not prosperity. That's not better quality of life. The other thing we need to do collectively is to start changing the narrative about what's possible, because we want the narrative of the Green New Deal not only to explain this MMT and the technical details of this, but also to push back and to call their bluff again on the idea that this is too expensive, unaffordable. What we don't realize is that the status quo, what we're already doing, is already way too expensive. The Green New Deal is actually cheaper. I'll give you an example. Would we rather clean the water source and install filter system on smokestacks and things like that, or not do that because it's too expensive and instead pay for cancer treatment for the next 30 years for everybody in town? Would we rather spend a little bit of money on after-school programs and summer camps for kids to inspire them with music and theater and sports, or not do that because it's too expensive, and then build prisons for those kids in the next 10 years, right? Which one is more expensive, right, in the long term? So shifting the narrative about what is affordable, what is expensive. If anything, everything we're introducing in the Green New Deal is a fraction of the financial and societal pain that we'll be suffering from for the next generation, right? So shift the conversation about what's possible. And the metric that we use, that public policy makers use, that your congressmen and senators and presidential candidates use, is misleading. And this is relevant in this part of the country with all the fracking stuff that's happening all the way from here to Ohio and beyond. So the metric they use is to say jobs. We want jobs, right? Good paying jobs, like the fracking jobs, right? So economic growth create jobs. And the pipelines are bringing economic growth, good paying jobs. We can't compromise on that. We need them. There's no other way other than that, right? So when you think about it, with all the water pollution and all the air pollution and the consequences in terms of health effects for the next 30 years, cancer treatment costs for the next 30 years, breathing conditions, all of these things, the way economists measure them and the way they get celebrated on TV, it's just messed up. We just don't realize it. So here's what happens. People get sick from drinking polluted water, from breathing polluted air. You go to the hospital, you get a prescription, you buy the prescription, you spend $50 on that prescription, GDP just went up by $50. That's called economic growth. Economic growth is the value of everything we spend money on, right? You go to the mall, you buy some clothing for $200, GDP went up by $200. So you spend, $200,000 on cancer treatment, GDP went up by $200,000. So we measure economic growth, and in it, we include all of these things. And they say GDP went up by 2%. It gets celebrated on TV. That's economic growth. But is that better quality of life? We build more prisons. We spent $500 million building prisons. GDP just went up by $500 million. So we need to change the narrative about the things that really matter in terms of quality of life, as opposed to this economic growth that produces wealth that goes to the top, right? And this brings me to the question of wealth and taxation. So a lot of people listen to the MMT narrative and say, oh, we can spend on all of these things. So are you saying we shouldn't be taxing the rich? Are you saying we shouldn't be taxing pollution? No, we didn't say that. We said we can spend on all the priorities we want, independently of taxation. But we should still tax. So tax the rich, not because we need their money or their permission to fund the Green New Deal. Tax the rich to reduce inequality. Tax the rich to reduce their power and influence in politics. Tax the rich to reduce their power and influence in pricing things for us in the economy. Those are two important but separate things. Do we need to tax oil companies, fossil fuel companies? Yeah. Not because we need their money to fund healthcare, but tax them because we want to decarbonize the economy, right? And to reduce their power and influence in politics, right? To reduce inequality again. Does that mean we shouldn't be taxing Wall Street, speculation? Well, we should tax Wall Street, not because we need their money or their permission to fund education, but because we want to reduce financial speculation. We want more financial stability and economic stability, again, to reduce their power and influence in politics. So decoupling the taxing from the spending is extremely important to our narrative, and it's technically correct to begin with, right? At the federal level. At the state level, we have to tax this to pay for that. But the federal level is very important. So when, was it Caleb? When you asked your question earlier about the government, if we have a better and more clear vision as a community, then when you talk to your congressman or congresswoman or senator, and they say, we don't afford it, you call their bluff. You say, no, I know we can afford it. And I know that we can tax the rich, and not because we need their money to pay for this. And when they say we can't live without pipelines in Pennsylvania or in Appalachia, say, no, we know better, because we know we can provide a job guarantee for local communities and invest in communities. When they say we can't afford all of this, you say, no, we can, because we're already spending 10 times more on cancer treatment and lowering our quality of life because of pipelines that you tell us are the only thing we can have, right? So it's empowering ourselves with the stronger narrative to be able to push back, because so far they have this dominant narrative that says you can't have this without cutting some of that. You can't have it both ways. If you want to have a little bit more healthcare, you're not going to have the green jobs. If you want to have more green jobs, then you're going to have to go to student debt, right? But what we're saying is we set the priorities straight, and we know how to pay for them without bankrupting the country, without causing inflation, and while at the same time undoing the power structure that keeps producing pollution and inequality and unemployment and poverty and all of that. And that's what we use the tax system for. That's what we use the power of the federal government to regulate. So tax and regulate to undo the power structure. Not because we need money to pay for things, right? So the MMT Green New Deal framework for spending is always about set the priorities straight. Do we have the physical productive resources to do it? And if we don't, how do we produce more of those so we can have, all the things that we want? And then the taxation and regulation is to tame inflation, to tame the political power and the power that extracts wealth to the top, right? You said it in the song, 26 people own half the wealth in the world. In this country, it's 3 people who own half the wealth. Next year, it's going to be maybe 1 or 2. And then beyond that, what is it going to be, right? So it's unsustainable on economic grounds or social grounds, on political grounds, on ecological grounds. This is it. We have 10 years to act on a large, massive scale, not 10 years to think and to wonder and to beg for money from the rich to pay for that. We have 10 years to intervene on a World War II scale without killing anybody, without dropping bombs. So this is going to be prosperity. We'll be creating jobs. We'll be investing in quality of life. We'll be investing in communities. So this should be the most unifying thing for the population, regardless of political affiliation. We're not talking Republican versus Democrats here. We're talking about who wants clean water. Is this a political choice? Who wants clean air? Right? This is not Republicans want clean air and Democrats don't, or vice versa. Everybody wants clean air, clean water, clean soil, better food, healthier society, good paying jobs. There's no distinction when it comes to the goals. But here's where the split happens. And you see this in the polling numbers about the Green New Deal. Massive support to the Green New Deal across the board, except when you come to how do you pay for it. And then a lot of people who oppose it or say, I don't know how I feel about this Green New Deal yet. They say it because they know, they've been told, that to pay for this, we have to tax somebody or borrow from somebody. So they think about it. If you tax, are you going to tax me? If you're taxing me, I can't afford it because I'm already broke, right? If you're taxing my employer, then my employer might outsource and move out of the country. Then I'm out of a job. My job is on the line. If you tax my employer, then my employer might, cut my wages. So they always see it as eventually it's going to fall on me because we're always convinced that tax this to pay for that. So we like all these ambitious programs. That's pie in the sky, beautiful dream. But at the end of the day, it's going to be my job on the line. So if that's the case, I'm not interested in it. But what MMT does is it shines this light on the system. It says that's not how we pay for things at the federal level. So we can have all of these things without taxing you, without necessarily taxing small businesses. Most people think small businesses. But if we're talking big businesses with big corporate power, we're taxing them not to pay for that, but we're taxing them for other purposes, right? And once we shine the light on how we're paying for this, trust me, there's not going to be Republicans versus Democrats on this. There's going to be full support all the national priorities that we can afford. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for being here, and I'll take questions. Oh, the mic.
Believe me, I don't need it.
It's for the live stream. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So I always enjoy your presentations, but I always have questions. So imagine a situation just as if I'm trying to explain this to someone, right?
Yeah.
So we decide in Congress we want to spend $60 billion revamping the energy system in the United States. And we just print $60 billion and we start spending it, right? So people's concern is at some point in that whole process of spending that money, putting it into the public, things are going to break down. All of a sudden, my steak is going to be $85 a pound, right? Because of inflation or whatever, right? So can you just take it from the decision to print $65 billion and then follow that and show that the system's not going to break down? Sure. I'm not going to encounter $1 tomorrow when somebody's going to tell me it's worth 2 cents.
Sure. So I'll pick exactly your example. Like we're going to hire, thousands of people across the country to invest in a new grid or solar panels or whatever. Those were initially, let's say, unemployed people in different communities. We got them through on-the-job training program and we paid them, right? So they had, almost no income. Now they have a decent income and decent, quality of life. So they would like to buy a steak for dinner every night, right? To follow your example. And you're worried about the steak now costing, inflating at 300%. So when we're spending, we're always spending with an eye towards the productive capacity. So we're paying people decent wages, and we know what people spend their money on. Decent food, decent transportation, decent housing, whatever things people spend their money on. So as we're hiring those millions of people to do this, we say, do we have enough productive capacity so that anybody who wants a steak for dinner can have a steak? If the answer is yes, then why would the price go up? If there's plentiful, beef production, if there's plentiful housing resources, if there's plentiful, new cars to be bought. But if we have a shortage of productive capacity to build new homes, to build new cars, to, produce more meat, then there's going to be more demand for beef, more demand for housing, more demand for cars, but not enough supply. The price is going to go up. And then it's going to get worse because the guys who control those markets, they're going to see plenty of people with cash looking to buy new homes, and the slumlords are going to increase rents And, the real estate, companies that control certain markets going to take advantage of the fact there's plenty of cash looking for homes. We're going to increase prices. And of course, it's going to create more exclusion. It's going to increase the price. That's why we're saying we always spend with an eye towards the resources. So if we know that people are going to increase demand for housing and that the housing market is controlled by a few people in certain pockets and it's going to take advantage of that, then we know we need to build more affordable housing in addition to building a renewable energy grid, right? So that's why the Green New Deal is not a one spending thing. It's a whole package that looks at the structure of the whole economy, the power centers of the economy, the inflation centers of the economy, and saying we need to change the whole engine, not just change the tires, not just change the rear view mirror of the car. We need to change the whole engine so that it produces the desirable outcome, right? But if we just do one part and not address the other one, then we're just causing inflation or just feeding the problem, right? I use the slumlord example and the housing example because those are, market structures that are there. And if we don't undo the power structure that creates exclusive housing for some and no housing for others, then we're just feeding the problem. Yes, please. And please use the microphone so people can hear the questions on the live stream.
Yeah, this may just be an extension of that because in my mind is how do we undo that power structure that profits from the inequality, that actually creates the inequality, that wants it to be maintained?
Very good question. So 2 strategies, depending on the case. One is to go after the power structure and tax it and regulate it to undo the power structure. Because you have to realize any market activity is taking place, can only take place within a legal framework. Right? Markets don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in anything that involves a contract. A contract needs to be enforced in a court of law. And lawmakers, that's why we call them lawmakers, they create the laws that allow certain markets to operate under certain rules. So we the people, government by the people, for the people, of the people, have the authority to create the legal framework within which those power structures exist. So the reason those power structures exist is because we let them legally exist and extract wealth to the top. So that's one avenue, and they're going to fight you, and they're going to resist you, and they're going to lobby against it, right? So that's one strategy. Another strategy is to leave that power structure as is and kind of, slip from under it and create your own other thing. So for example, when you're talking about markets where you have dominant players that control energy prices or housing prices or oil companies that control gas prices and so on, you say, well, keep your gas. We're creating renewable energy sources completely outside of your realm of control, right? If you have slumlords who are controlling this, slumlords, you can use eminent domain, right? If we say this is a national, we use eminent domain to allow private pipeline companies to take over private land. We can use eminent domain to take over private property, owned and controlled by slumlords, and give it to Habitat for Humanity to create jobs, on-the-job paid training, to give people decent housing, right? This is in our hands. I mean, if this is a democracy and we believe in a democracy, these are the tools of the democratic process, right? We're not and there's precedence for this. If we're talking about housing, create alternative, affordable public housing and leave the slumlords where they're, falling apart homes. Not ideal, obviously, use of resources, but these are all strategies to combat power structures and leave them behind. When it comes to banking and Wall Street, there is, public banking is useful in a sense because it allows you to exit that power structure of private banks. That's one example. We just went through the most devastating financial crisis in the history of the world. And today's podcast is with Bill Black, and I haven't heard it yet, so I'm assuming he talked about this. Bill Black was one of the chief federal government regulators on Wall Street during the savings and loans crisis. I think he single-handedly probably put a few hundred, bankers in prison with his investigation for fraud, for criminal activity, right? And that's why he never got a job with the federal government after that, right? Why didn't we bring Bill Black and his team in 2008 to investigate the criminal activity that happened on Wall Street, right? So there's a lot of people who should have gone to prison after 2008. Most of the people who went to prison are kind of the lower end, fraudulent activity in Ohio and other places. But the higher ups, the Obama administration decided, we're not going to touch that, right? That's the sacred power structure, right? That was a political choice, right? So when we say government of the people, by the people, for the people, that's how you undo the power structure, by going after the power structure, not saying we're going to bail you out and, completely ignore the criminal activity. So this is really why we're trying to revive the participatory democratic process, so that if we elect individuals, and individuals who are in office today who say, we're not going to, save the planet, we're not going to create green jobs, we're not going to provide health care for all, we're not going to, prosecute criminal activity on Wall Street, and we're empowered with the knowledge that we have as a community, and we say, well, we're going to unseat you. We're coming for your seats, right? And that's the democratic process, in peaceful transition to a government for the people, by the people, of the people. And that's why it's important to organize. It's important to have these town hall meetings. It's important to empower people with knowledge that says, we know better. We call your bluff. They told us we can't live without Wall Street. If we take down the big banks, the system will collapse. It will be Armageddon. We call their bluff. We say, no, we can. Right? So they're holding the economy hostage with their power structures, like, putting, a gun on our heads and saying, you can't do that. We're going to call their bluff and say it's a water pistol. We know better. You don't have the power. The power is in our hands as a democracy. So it's important to push back against their narrative. So, microphone. Right. There's a question here, and then Steve has a question.
Thank you for your talk. So I have two questions. The first, if MMT was became the orthodoxy, what role, if any, would the Federal Reserve have with monetary policy? With interest rates, would that still be a significant portion of determining the money supply? And then the second question deals, does MMT have anything to say about when things should be publicly owned versus privately owned? With regards to environmental, there's somewhat a debate. Should utility companies be nationalized, or should there be private? So I was curious, is that a separate political economy question, or does MMT have anything to share about that?
Thank you. So the first question about the role of the Fed in an MMT-informed world. The Fed is a creature of Congress. It was created by the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. It's mandated by Congress to do its job, and Congress can at any minute change its mandate, clarify its mandate, focus its mandate. It's very clear in terms of how it's done. Now, the Fed doesn't have the most transparent record in government, and that can be improved, definitely on that front, because they were part of the big bailout of Wall Street without any transparency, without any kind of democratic process. So that can be improved. But from an MMT perspective, when we talk about the federal government, we talk about the federal government as the consolidated treasury and central bank, which is the Fed. They're both part of the same unit, and they're both dealing with the same economy and conducting fiscal and monetary policy to achieve, hopefully full employment, price stability, economic growth, whatever the national priorities are. So the clearer the mandate, the better the coordination, the better the outcomes from an MMT perspective. Your second question about private banks versus public banks and nationalizing banks, right?
And utilities as well.
Public utilities. Yeah, that's, as I said earlier, part of the the New Deal, the Green New Deal idea is taxing and regulation, right? And regulation of utilities. But on banking in particular, one of the things that we tend to forget, and we were made to forget, is that private banks can only operate in the U.S. if they have a banking license. And a banking license is given to them by the federal government, right? So the initial creation of banks was, here's a banking license that gives you certain powers and privileges, the power and the privilege to issue credit, right? Think of it as the federal government sort of giving a license to banks to be the franchisee of the government to issue credit. In other words, to create money into the economy on behalf of the federal government. So we give them that license with the intention of serving the public purpose, funding, housing construction, funding industrial development, whatever the national priorities are. But then over time, we forgot that they're supposed to serve the public purpose, and that if they don't serve the public purpose, we can take away their banking license and give it to somebody else. Or we can take away their banking license and create a public bank that serves their public purpose, building bridges, building homes, funding whatever national priorities are. So part of the MMT shining a light on the system is shining a light on the legal framework within which banks operate and saying, hey, you're supposed to serve the public purpose. But we lost track of that, and we allowed them to hijack the system and extract wealth for the top 1%. So MMT says, we can take away your license, or you can serve the public purpose, or we can create a real competition to you in the form of public banks who will compete with you and serve the public purpose, right? So we're talking about things like postal banking, where the federal government gives the post office the right to operate as a bank, right? And serve the underbanked and unbanked population. 29% of people in the U.S. don't have access to banking services. They have to cash their checks at Walmart and pay $9 for it or whatever. And they have to wire money, from one part of the country to the other and pay excessive fees. And can't, a bank will deny them a bank account because they're too poor, because they don't have stable employment. Well, the post office can give everybody a bank account. And you can cash your check at the post office for nothing compared to what you do at Walmart or at, payday lending places and things like that. So there's alternative ways of doing banking. We're not inventing anything new. The post office used to be a public bank, but it was just too good at what it does, and it was too competitive for banks, so they lobbied to make it go away. Most countries around the world, the post office is also a bank, right? So this is not, new invention. These are all legal precedents that we have in this country, that other countries have, that we can design the system whichever way we want, with private, with public, with a mix. We can say this area of the economy is just not going to be for the private sector. Healthcare is a human right. It's not a for-profit industry. We're not going to have any for-profit insurance company suck money out of the system. This is just going to be universal coverage, right? We can do that. Some countries do that, right? So, Steve, you have a question.
Yes. So, Fadhel, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you in particular, given the nature of the Trump administration right now and their focus on immigrants and really, really demonizing those who are migrants and refugees, et cetera, I found the Green New Deal, in particular the job guarantee and other such aspects, not only that MMT is built upon in terms of the lens, but in terms of the policy space that we often talk about. Can you address how climate crisis has impacted impoverished nations, the immigrant community, and how we can maybe take away some of the xenophobia that, many of the people in our movement are focused largely on the social justice side of this, not realizing the economic component that creates the fix, or at least one of the larger parts of the fix. I think you're expert at explaining this.
Yeah. So when you think of climate change, a lot of people are thinking the future is going to be bad. without realizing that it's already bad, not just in terms of the health effects and the changing weather patterns effect, and agricultural effects, but it's really already affecting millions of people around the world who are literally relocating, moving from one part of the country to another, from one part of the world to another, but they're not labeled as climate refugees. But that's exactly who they are. And those numbers are going to accelerate, right? So I'll give you an example. The Syrian civil war, whatever you want to call it, right? 3-4 years before the first bullets were fired in 2011, 1.5 million people had to move from rural areas in Syria to the larger cities because of drought. And Syria is not, not used to droughts, but this was the most intense drought in the history of Syria and the history of the Middle East. Syria is one of the few countries in the world that had food self-sufficiency. They actually produced enough food to feed their population. They didn't need to import basic necessities, which was, because of their military history and conflicts and all that, they wanted food security. That drought completely destroyed their food security. So 1.5 million people moved to the big cities, putting more pressure on schools and housing and food and energy resources. So its social and political tension was building in the country. 85% of the cattle, was destroyed. People's livelihood were destroyed. That's why they moved to the cities. They didn't want to move to the cities. And this is before the civil war, before any of this. So when you think of, I'm not saying that climate change is what caused the civil war, right, and the conflict, but climate change exacerbated the effects and kind of created the fertile ground for this. And so when the rest of us see, Syrian refugees moving to Europe, we treat them as, it was just the fight for democracy and justice caused all this influx of immigrants and, terrorism and all of that. But it's climate change is at the roots of a lot of these moving populations. Now, in the context of the US and Europe, when we're told that we have scarcity of resources, financial resources, that we can't afford, to have more of this unless we lose some of that, and then you feed the narrative that says immigrants are coming and they're taking your jobs, right? Then how do you feel about that? We don't want more immigrants, right? They're coming to take our jobs. And if you remember the narrative that I was describing about climate change, about the Green New Deal, then trust me, we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to need more people because this climate change thing is not just local, this is global. We need a global Green New Deal. We need to create these jobs not just in the US, but across the world, right, to mitigate the effects of climate change in rural communities across the planet, right? The estimates that most scientific studies have today is that the Middle East, in my lifetime, within the next 20, 30 years, is going to be uninhabitable during the summer months, which means roughly 500 million people have to move out of the region. So when we're talking about climate refugees, the Syrian crisis is nothing. When the Europeans close their borders, says no more refugees, we can't afford it. Just wait for climate change hitting the Middle East hard in the next 20, 30 years. Then we're going to be dealing with these massive shifts of populations. And imagine the pressure on the physical resources for housing, for food, for schools, for all of these things. Then you're going to have the real inflation from climate change, not this inflation, fictitious inflation that they're talking about. So we can't afford to wait for these things to materialize. It's already happening, but it's kind of hidden in plain sight because we're not labeling people climate refugees, right? So it's really, intersectional in the sense that it's intersects with racism, with xenophobia, with all of these things are at play as we speak. And it doesn't help to, blame immigrants for climate change or blame immigrants for losing jobs when we have the potential and we have the solutions within reach. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm here for the rest of the day. I'm happy to chit-chat and answer questions. But thank you for being here for your questions.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This latter part of our event here today for Green New Deal, Our Path to Progress, is going to be brought with a video from one of the people that was supposed to be here but had an unfortunate event, meaning that he's got another event in Chicago where we're expanding the reach of modern monetary theory. His name is Pastor Delman Coates, and Delman is just a phenomenal speaker, as you'll see in a moment. Delman is the head of the Our Money campaign, and Delman's got a particularly interesting perspective on this. As the pastor of Mount Enon Church, he's got a very large congregation in Clinton, Maryland, and he's going to tell you all about that in the video. But one of the things about Delman is this. Delman came from a positive money background. For those of you who don't know what positive money is, you can look it up. But bottom line is it's a very adjacent mindset to modern monetary theory. And as he came into modern monetary theory, he realized, wow, this is so important that we can't hold on to this knowledge. Let me take it to the churches, let the churches know about it. So Delman is creating a organization, a campaign called Our Money, and his video explains what they do and why it's so important. With that, I bring you Delman Coates.
Hi, my name is Delman Coates. I am the organizer of the Our Money campaign, and I'm so delighted to be with you this morning. I regret that I couldn't be there in Harrisburg today for this incredible gathering on perhaps one of the most central issues that we're confronting today from a public policy perspective, and that is how we're going to address climate change. It is indeed the existential threat facing humanity, and I want to commend Real Progressives for bringing together activists and organizers and average, ordinary people alike to talk about the policy solution that is really designed to address our climate change crisis today, and that's the Green New Deal. I am a local pastor in Clinton, Maryland, right outside the nation's capital, and we have organized the Our Money campaign over the past year to really address the central question that is always raised by policymakers and politicians when it comes to robust spending proposals like the Green New Deal. It's the central question that is always asked when discussing other issues as well, whether it's Medicare for all, free public college, abolishing student loan debt, and a range of other priorities as well. And that question is, how are we going to pay for it? Where is the money going to come from? This question tends to be the one fiscal policy question that is used by elected officials and politicians to place constraints on our ability to address the issues that we care about. And so I'm delighted to talk to you today to share why I am an unapologetic supporter of the Green New Deal and a range of other robust spending proposals that I just mentioned. One of the things that I think it's really important for citizens to understand is modern monetary theory, and to understand how MMT for short relates to issues like the Green New Deal. And so our campaign is really about trying to mainstream modern monetary theory, which has been a school within the economics discipline for 30 plus years. And I really want to help to mainstream MMT for average, ordinary people, because whatever your issue of concern is, whatever you're passionate about, whether it's addressing concerns as it relates to the environment, public education, mass incarceration, affordable housing, healthcare, addressing joblessness and unemployment in our society today, it's really critically important that you understand some of the core framing and concepts of MMT. And so I think I want to start by really just sort of raising who is this for? who is MMT for? Do you have to have a master's or a PhD in economics in order to really understand MMT, in order to understand monetary and fiscal policy for that matter? Do you have to be a subject matter expert? And to that question, I would say no. Modern monetary theory may have started as a school within the economics discipline, but it's for average, ordinary people. It's for activists and organizers, for anyone who's really concerned about how we're going to make our world a better place and how we're going to make our economy work for us rather than against us. And so this talk today, and I'm sure the other speakers that will come together later in the morning and afternoon, are really all designed to help you to understand how we're going to pay for robust spending proposals such as a Green New Deal or Medicare for all, free public college. And for me, this is really critically important. I came to this journey as a local pastor wrestling with our foreclosure crisis here in the state of Maryland. Maryland ranked number 2 and 3 in the country in foreclosures in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. The county in which I pastor, Prince George's County, led the state in foreclosures. And so one of the things that I really wrestled with over the last 10 years that really started me on this journey was really, I saw the injustice of banks being bailed out and average ordinary people being put out of their homes. This really seemed to me to be a moral stain on our economy, and to really think about the fact that the very financial institutions that caused the global financial crisis are now 2 and 3 times larger than they were in 2007 and 2008. I mean, it just did not seem right to me. And so I really devoted, the last 7 or 8 years trying to understand the workings of our monetary system. We think we know what money is. We think we know where money comes from. We kind of take it for granted. But one of the things that I discovered is just foundational questions about our economic system, questions about monetary and fiscal policy I just had no knowledge of. And I'm so thankful today for my exposure to MMT, or modern monetary theory, because it's really helped me to understand that if we change the way we think about money, we can really change the world. And that's so important because conventional economics is really predicated on the assumption that money is scarce. This is sort of a carryover from the time in which our money system in America was based on the gold standard. Well, of course, many of you may know that we went off the gold standard in 1971. So what that means then is the ability of the federal government to print what we think of and use as dollars is no longer constrained by this scarce commodity called gold. And so MMT has really, and I really am so thankful to all of the academics and economists who have really done an incredible job over the past 3 decades of laying the sort of intellectual foundation for MMT. But I think some of the basic foundational concepts of MMT are that the federal government is not a household. Like, say this with me. Say the government. I said, say this with me. The government is not a household. Now, you may ask, well, Delman, why are you saying this? Well, that's important because what I have found is that in many public policy conversations, whether it's with average, ordinary citizens, politicians, and even some economists, they operate from the assumption that the federal government's budget is like a household budget. And many of you know that in your household, you need revenue first in order to spend, right? And it's regarded as fiscally irresponsible to spend more than you have coming in. Well, MMT helps us to understand that the federal government, now we're not talking about local and state governments, but the federal government does not need revenue first in the form of borrowing or taxation in order to spend. And that really opens up enormous potential fiscal policy space for thinking about what's possible when it comes to funding robust spending proposals such as the Green New Deal. Think about it. God forbid if we had to go to war tomorrow as a nation. We don't want war. We want to do everything possible to avoid it. But God forbid we had to go to war tomorrow. Think about it. The federal government would not have a debate or a conversation about where's the money going to come from for the war. Politicians would not say which multi-millionaires and billionaires and corporations are we going to tax first so that we can spend money for the war. And they don't do that because the government does not need revenue first in order to spend on public priorities. If our elected leaders determine that this is in the national interest, we can create all of the money we need to address our greatest social and economic crises and needs, right? So in like manner, we are at war when it comes to the environment. Look, you know, experts tell us that we have about 10 or 11 years to really be serious about addressing carbon emissions and getting the CO2 out of our environment to address global warming. We have about 10 or 11 years, right? And so to do this, it is going to take really bold proposals, right? We need bold proposals. We need bold steps. We really can't afford a kind of gradualism or incrementalism when it comes to addressing climate change. And so when it comes to the question of, well, how are we going to pay for proposals like the Green New Deal, we need to free ourselves from this question of who we're going to tax first. What private sources of investment do we have to tap into in order to pay for proposals like a Green New Deal? We pay for it by creating the money for it, right? And so I want to say to all of the activists and organizers, I want you to do something that I've started to do. When I hear politicians now talk about, oh, well, this proposal is going to cost $30 trillion over 10 years. It's unaffordable. I say to them, it's not going to cost us $30 trillion to pay for Medicare for all, for example. It's going to create $30 trillion. It's not going to cost us, it's going to create $30 trillion. And the way that the federal government creates money is that the federal government creates money through deficit spending. This is probably the second aspect of modern monetary theory that I want to share. Since the federal government is not a household, though it's important to then understand, well, how the federal government creates money or puts money in circulation. And the way that the federal government puts money in circulation is through deficit spending. Now, in your household, deficit spending is a negative. And the thing about MMT is that it can kind of be counterintuitive until you really process it and understand it. Well, in your household, deficits aren't bad. Deficits are negative. But because the federal government has the power of the purse, has the power to create money, in the olden days to print the money, the way that it creates money is through deficit spending. What's a deficit? A deficit is when the amount you spend exceeds, taxes and revenue in the form of taxes and other forms of revenue, right? So when the federal government deficit spends, that puts money in circulation. Deficit spending is net public money creation. That's the way we say it in the Our Money campaign, that deficit spending is net public money creation. That when the federal government deficit spends, it creates money, it leaves money in circulation for the private sector, individuals and businesses to spend and to provide for a sustainable economy. So in order to pay for the Green New Deal, we need the federal government to do more deficit spending. And that deficit spending is not a bad thing. There's this hysteria that you oftentimes hear in the financial media where politicians, liberal and conservatives, Republicans, independents, and Democrats will decry budget deficits at the federal level. They will decry, the rising federal debt. Well, when you understand modern monetary theory, then you understand that we really want the federal government to run deficits. Because when the public sector is in deficit, when the federal government is in deficit, then the private sector is in surplus. And that's what we want. I really don't have time to go into this with the amount of time that I've been allotted, but that's a very core, fundamental aspect of MMT that I think really helps us to think about the possibilities for funding the Green New Deal. Now, invariably, someone's going to say, well, this sounds hyperinflationary. That's one of the common criticisms that people will raise when it comes to talking about deficit spending and public money creation. Some smart person who's had a year or two of college econ, or perhaps they're an astute economist, they will say, well, this sounds hyperinflationary, and they will invariably attempt to point to some examples in history where money creation in their mind, or they assume, led to hyperinflation. They'll talk about Zimbabwe, they'll talk about Weimar Germany, they'll talk about Venezuela in a more recent context. And they'll say, well, no, we can't create money because this will lead to inflation. It is a travesty that people would raise this, because what we know is that inflation is not just the cause of money creation. It's a very complex issue that many seasoned economists and MMT economists know a lot about inflation. But you cannot compare inflation in Zimbabwe, Weimar Germany, and Venezuela to the context in America. These are not sovereign governments with a sovereign money system, and the context as it relates to productivity and resources are totally not what we're relating to here, right? But someone's going to say, well, what about inflation? Well, I think that's a good question, because it really leads to the third sort of aspect of modern monetary theory that I think is really important for me, that when it comes to robust spending proposals, we're not constrained by revenue, right? We know now that we're not constrained by revenue. And we can responsibly create, and the key word there is responsibly, we can responsibly create all of the money we need to address our greatest social and economic challenges, as long as we don't exceed our inflationary target, right? There are smart people who study all of the metrics of our economy. They have an inflationary target. And as long as we don't exceed that inflationary target, we can create all the money we need to address our greatest social challenges. And so that means then that money is not scarce. Money is almost, abundant. And money creation is ubiquitous. It happens all the time. And the question is, would we rather have an economy that relies on money created through public spending, or would we rather have an economy that relies on money created through private lending? Because money is going to be created in one of two ways. It is either going to be created by the government when it spends, or it will be created by private banks when it lends. And when the federal government underutilizes the power of money creation to address priorities in the public interest, when it underutilizes the power of the public purse, it forces the public, it forces individuals and businesses and local and state governments to then turn to private borrowing and lending in the form of floating bonds, taking out credit cards and other kinds of debt, private debt, in order to address that need. We're saying that now the residual consequences of having an economy that relies on private lending. And I want to suggest that if we educate the public about the power of the public purse, we can address our greatest social and economic challenges, including our climate challenge through the Green New Deal. Say this with me: change money, change the world. Say it with me one more time: change money, change the world. If we change the way we think about money, we can literally change the world. Dr. King said this: if a soul lives in crisis, sins will be committed. But the guilty one is not the one who commits the sins, but the one who causes the darkness. The challenges we see today, the cause of the darkness that we see today, socially and economically, is a function, I would suggest, of us underutilizing the power of the public purse to address our greatest social challenges. Look, thank you for inviting me to come to share with you today. I'm sorry if I went over my time, but I'm deeply passionate about how we develop a sustainable economy, an economy that works for us and not against us, an economy in which money is created to address issues in the public interest rather than credit being created to merely meet the interests of the private sector. Thank you so much. My name is Delman Coates with the Our Money campaign. If you're interested in following us, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our web address is ourmoneyus.org. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for that. Delman, if you're listening, we want to thank you for making that great video. Joy, what's next on the agenda?
So next we're going to have three PA environmentalists come up and tell their story, share why this movement is important to them. So first we're going to have Craig Stevens. He is originally from California. He now owns his father's sixth generation family farm. And Craig first learned firsthand, I'm sorry, I can't read my writing. He learned firsthand the harms civil and human rights violations that extreme extracts cause. So in any case, sorry about that. My writing's horrible. But yes, Craig, thank you so much for joining us.
How's everybody doing out there? So as you heard, I'm a native Californian. I moved here to the East Coast when my dad got diagnosed with esophageal cancer, terminal. He lived a year. I spent the last year of his life with him in our ancestral home. And so I lost my mom to cancer and 10 other family members to cancer. So when I hear the word cancer, I put my family's face on it. And hopefully not my kids, but I always think about them. So it's kind of interesting. I'm an accidental activist, but I'm not really an activist. I'm a realist. What that means is I was brought up as a constitutional conservative, almost very hard right, Tea Party style. And what changed my mind was my firsthand experiences in Pennsylvania. In 2010, January, I moved to my ancestral property. And then I went to visit my neighbors in Demick, Pennsylvania, and that's what their well water looked like. And it is still looking like that. If you can see that stuff swirling around in there is diesel and antifreeze. So when this bottle has been left many times out in my car when it's 20 degrees outside, and it will not freeze. So I get challenged all the time by the oil and gas industry. Are you a water quality expert? And I said, no, but if I can take my tap water, put it in my freezer for 3 or 4 days, and it still does that, I don't have to be Bill Nye the Science Guy to figure out that Houston, we have a problem. So, believe it or not, that's not the only place, Demick, Pennsylvania. You can go to hundreds of communities in Pennsylvania and find the same problem. Their water changed color. Mine did not. After living at my house for 3 years in 2013, I ended up with a metal taste in my water. I called the DEP and the Department of Health immediately, and they said, well, if you get any health impacts, let us know. 2 weeks after the metal taste started, I was standing at my sink at my ancestral house, and my sinuses opened up like a faucet of blood. And I had 8 spontaneous nosebleeds over the next 2 weeks that were so severe. I mean, it made me dizzy. That much blood came out of me. Had no idea what, but I'll tell you, it started with the metal taste, and it went right on for 2 more weeks. I stopped drinking and cooking with the water, and they went away just like a light switch was turned off. So don't let anybody tell you can't figure out what might be causing something. Just stop doing something you think might be causing it. I'm going to riff through this pretty rapidly. Demick, Pennsylvania, there's a picture of candidate Wolf, that's Governor Wolf now, on August 8th of 2014 when he was candidate. He went to my neighbors in Demick, saw this problem, and then got elected and has never been back nor interested in talking to anybody about the problem. Therein lies our issues. There's Ray Kimball's water tanks that they were installed in 2009. He's been living out of water tanks just like about 100 of my neighbors in Susquehanna County have for the last 10 or 11 years. They have to haul water and put bleach in it to shower, bathe, launder. Those tanks that were put in by the industry that originally provided water are actually cattle tanks. They're non-potable. They're not for human consumption or use. It says right on it. That's the picture from Ray's tank. This is out front of Ray's house. Just 6-8 months ago, he had a 2.5 foot wide by 12-inch deep, 2 foot diameter hole that was in his road from the heavy traffic from these heavy trucks. And nobody fixed it. It took 4 months to get somebody to come out and fix it. Ray would hear cars hit it at night, and they would literally get the whole front end of the car torn off. That's what our road condition is. When I do tours, and I encourage anybody that's in the vicinity of Pennsylvania, anywhere nearby, we do tours in northeastern Pennsylvania and southwestern. Why southwestern? This is where drilling started. We became aware of a story in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette back in June that said 67 kids were found to have had rare cancers in the last 12 years. 13 passed away from the rare cancers. We're talking Ewing sarcoma and glioblastoma, the rare brain tumors. And I got interested because of the cancer issue. So now we're doing tours. We've actually, for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth, had 15 elected officials go down and tour that area, senators and House members. Before that, nobody would leave their district to go see anything because they thought, well, I don't want to go to somebody else's district. But I said, why don't you go to see what's happening in theirs before it comes to yours? So our issues now is education. This is a picture of a 9 square mile spot in Demick, Pennsylvania. If you don't know this, for 10 years now, they've not been allowed to put Cabot Oil and Gas, which is the driller there, has not been allowed by the state to put a drill bit in the ground. But they'll still tell you there's nothing wrong with the water. So what's funny is with that is we asked Scott Perry, the head of oil and gas. By the way, anybody know Scott Perry has been in the same position for 12 years. We know where the problem is. They're called the DEP. They issue the permits to do this stuff. So we asked Scott, this is back in 2018, we said, Scott, why can't Cabot drill there? And he wrote back in an email on the letterhead for DEP, because Cabot has not yet demonstrated that the water supply has returned to background conditions. Today, I mean, still they can't drill there. So when I educate, I'm just trying to tell the truth. There's when the EPA came into Demick and said that there was a problem. There's the Auditor General of Pennsylvania. Auditor General De Pasquale says rapid shale gas development outpaced DEP's ability to oversee the industry or protect water quality. Nothing new. There's a flow chart showing Scott Perry is the only one still in that position after 3 governors, 7 DEP secretaries. Almost all of them go to work for the oil and gas industry after they're out. So if we wonder where the problem is, just look at the people we put in there. Penvest, who gives money for public projects, gave us a $12 million forgivable loan to run a water line to Demick. As soon as they voted to do that, they were sued. The state was sued and the DEP by some of our neighbors in the oil and gas industry not to build a water line to bring people safe water. So these people are living out of tanks and they have to haul the water. When it was being delivered, everybody out there, it was costing the industry, Cabot, $100 a day per delivery at homes. That's $3,000 a month for what used to come out of the ground for nothing, for the simple electric pump to bring it up to the surface. This is not something they're unaware of. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 consent orders signed by the CEO of Cabot that says, we don't agree with the findings, but we will not argue it in a court of law. Ray Kimball, who lives next door to this gentleman, Scott Illy's water, Ray has been dragged into court, and they said they were lying about him. He's been brought in for a $5 million lawsuit against him because all the neighbors were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. That means they give them a little bit of money because they can't get it through the normal process, and they end up not being able to speak. Here's the Insurance Journal. That's a national journal. Here's their headline: fracking companies silence water complaints with sealed settlements. You can't. My dad was a first responder for 63 years in the Civil Air Patrol, longest serving in the history of Civil Air Patrol. He died an active lieutenant colonel. He said, when you mix health and safety with politics, everyone dies. Doesn't matter whether you're talking bubonic plague or AIDS or anything else. You cannot stop something that you refuse to acknowledge as existing. Believe it or not, there's only 89 unconventional drilling companies in the Commonwealth. You heard earlier, just Google, anybody out there, Google Wall Street Journal, oil and gas industry debt to the banks. Last year was $883 billion. I did not say million, I said billion. Now that we've passed into 19, almost to 20, it's over $1 trillion that the oil and gas industry owes the banks. We're betting the future on companies that in the last 10 years have incurred $1 trillion in debt that they can't pay back. I'm sorry, there is no future when you owe that. Here is the health consultation document by the ATSDR, that's CDC, saying that it's a health consultation for demic. I'm going to riff through this next one. So we put a water hydrant in to get my neighbor. I had a water hydrant installed by Pennsylvania American Water Company to get these people water because the governor at Corbett at the time let him shut off the water deliveries. As soon as we put it in, we were attacked. The borough of Montrose, which is the county seat, filed against the property owner we put it on. Pennsylvania American Water installed it for free for us. And they filed a $500 a day zoning violation against them to stop. They said they didn't want the Demic people, the water pirates from Demic, getting the water from Montrose. Guys, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Here's a couple who are surrounded by a pooling unit, Cabot Oil and Gas again. They're the spot right in the middle that's still white, whereas everything else is crosshatched. They surrounded them with a pooling unit. They would never sign, and to this day have not. They've extracted gas underneath their property, stolen it, and not paid them a dime. These people are very right-wing conservative people, but after touring with us, they realize that it's a losing game to sign up for this. Then the insults come, like PK's going to come up next, and Mariner's 2 people. This is Virginia, and this is a federal. This is a threat assessment to people who protest against pipelines. I don't know about you, but if I live on the property, they're stealing it by eminent domain, whether it's the state or the federal government, I file a lawsuit. I'm not an activist. I'm not a terrorist. I'm the property owner that pays taxes. They've perverted the whole system where we, fighting for our rights, become the terrorists, and the ones that come in and destroy our property, cut our trees down, don't pay us at all. The Constitution Pipeline is an example. 25 miles in Pennsylvania, 100 miles to Albany in New York. When we heard about it in 2012, Vera Scroggins, my neighbor that does the tours, we went all along the route, what we thought was the route, and we educated people. We met Sean Lennon, who it was going near the Sean Lennon, Yoko Ono, John Lennon's family farm. And we got everybody riled up before they even did it. Why am I bringing it up? Because what they did was they got Pennsylvania, who says yes to everything, to say yes. So that they let the company come in and they cleared the trees for 25 miles all the way up to the border. But they had yet to gotten approval on the 100 mile. What company anywhere takes a project where 80% of it has not been approved, but they cut it down? And then they have the audacity to go. First, they showed up at my neighbor's house, the Hollerans, with M16s and 30-round magazines and zip ties for 100. They never got in their way. But this show of force is to make sure that we, the citizens, stand down, that we don't give them any trouble. Boy, I wonder what would have happened if they went to George Washington or Thomas Jefferson's property and tried the same thing. You know what would have happened. Hey, we're here, George, to cut down the trees and put in a 40-inch gas line, and we're going to transport this overseas, and you can't do anything about it. George Washington or Thomas Jefferson would have said, hey, hang on, I'm going to go get my attitude adjustment tool hanging above my fireplace, load it up, and if you're in range when I get out, we'll see who's going to put anything anywhere without my permission as the property owner. Now, we just accept this. We have to stop accepting it, folks. As you heard earlier, we the people own this country. These people are seat warmers. They represent us because we allow them to, but when they don't do our bidding, we need to toss them and get people in there. My own property, they tried to force a pipeline across my property by eminent domain. We fought it and won. They can't do that. But when they're installing it behind my neighbor's house, 16-inch pipeline, they blew the bottom of my 25-foot wide trout stream out 8 times over 2.5 months. My entire creek and a tributary of Susquehanna River were filled with drilling mud for months. They couldn't put a 16-inch line. You think they're going to put a 42-inch line underneath the Potomac or the James River? No, they're not. Or what there's happening, and you'll hear about Mariner East. The day they blew it out, they brought the mud-sucking trucks. One of them ran a stop sign and flipped over and crushed my neighbor John Jones to death in his car. You'll notice that the passenger door is open. That was his 17-year-old daughter, Allison, that got to watch her dad die 5 minutes after he was crushed into the car. So don't let anybody tell you that putting a pipeline in is not harmful. There's a pipeline in Westmoreland County that all of a sudden had a bad day and blew up. The house that was 200 feet away burned to the ground. The house that was 800 feet away, it melted all the plastic siding off the side of the vinyl siding off the side of the house, 800 feet away. It left a crater the size of a football field in there. So what do we do about it? Well, people are out there asking, well, it's the oil and gas industry. What can you do? Well, we do stuff about it. Like when nobody would listen in Pennsylvania, I started going with my team to other states. There's Florida. It took us about 3 years. Everything that's in yellow, representing 80% of the population of Florida, we just had the counties pass bans because at that time the legislature wouldn't pass one. Our focus is education. When you educate yourself, don't get afraid. They want you afraid. They want us all to run scared. Stand up against it. The only time you're going to regret it if you don't. We got so good at killing pipelines, like the Constitution pipeline was never revived. The state of New York said no. So now they started virtual pipelines. These are trucks. They look like Walmart trucks. They put methane, compressed natural gas, in up to 5,000 psi. That's 3 or 4 times the pressure in a high-pressure gas line. And as soon as they set them up, the second day they were in operation, they flipped one of them over in the ditch. That's a hazardous material vehicle that crashed. So far, they've had 6 crashes where injuries happened. The last 2 crashes in the last 3 weeks killed the 2 drivers. The one in Albany, a mile from the governor's mansion, that flipped over, Albany. The first responders didn't know what it is, so they lit road flares. If that goes off, you want to know what the explosive potential of one of these trailers is? Anybody know what a mother of all bomb is? It's the largest in the inventory of the United States non-nuclear weapon. Largest bomb ever made that's non-nuclear. These are equivalent of 11 Moabs in one trailer, and they're driving on the roads right now, right down the road here. They're driving up and down the state. A pipeline costs $3 to $5 billion in up to about 4 or 5 years to get it installed if everything goes through. They can set up a filling station in our community like they did in 3 to 6 months with $80 to $100 million. They're running 100 of these a day from our area to near Albany, New York, and back and forth and back and forth. It's ridiculous. No oversight. Even after these crashes, the only time they came was when the drivers got killed. But the 6 got injured before that? No, they didn't. Don't just talk to people that you agree with. There's a picture of me with this water with Lindsey Graham, not exactly a left-winger. There's where Scott Pelley put it on CBS News that night. He wanted to know what was in the bottle. I said, contaminated water from fracking. He goes, you got a picture with Lindsey Graham with that? Yeah, I did. There's where I stood behind Governor Hogan when he signed the ban bill, a Republican in Maryland. Our education was key. There's Rick Scott. I'm standing with Rick Scott in Florida, educating him. There's Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida. We gave her information, pictures. There's the only governor I haven't met of the 13 places they tell on. The governor that represents my family's property for 187 years, Governor Wolf. He runs from us every time we do it. And he's got a there's Governor Northam. Of course, he doesn't have his blackface on, so he might not be in trouble, but I'm just telling you right now, this is ridiculous. I go to the Democrat-controlled states, and I figure they'll listen. They run from you faster than the Republicans do. So here's my thing. Do not count anybody out, but don't think just because we put somebody in that we agree with 90% doesn't mean they're going to do things like poison us and put us in positions where our kids get cancer. What am I doing about it myself to help my children's future? I'll tell you what I'm doing. My 13th brand new vehicle, I have a business. Every 3 years I buy a new vehicle, is a Chevy Bolt all electric. I gave up SUVs. That's what I drove because I carry stuff around for me. Why did I do that? Everyone said, get a hybrid. You can't go anywhere in an all electric vehicle. 2 weeks after I bought it, I drove to Orlando, Florida to visit friends and back. Yes, you can go anywhere. What do I like about it? They're quiet. There's zero emissions. It's amazing. So there's the place I found in San Diego that actually has charging stations that are mobile for charging your battery electric vehicle without hooking up to power. It's standalone. That's what happens when innovation happens. Yes, we can do a Green Deal. Yes, we can save the planet. If we all go out and buy one of these things, by the way, they're reasonably priced. You get big rebates and you don't buy. I was $500 a month in gasoline because I traveled so much. Now I haven't been to a gas station in 15 months. My son asked me how much, he's in California, how much is gas out in Pennsylvania? I don't know, or on the East Coast. I don't know, I haven't been to a gas station in 15 months. So when we do these things, when we put solar panels up, guess what? California is shutting off people's power because they're afraid of fires getting started. They can't shut your power off if you're making it yourself from your roof or from wind turbine or geothermal. They can't shut it off your power. And the only way to turn it off is to burn your house down, but not worrying about fires happening. So stand up, listen to what's being said today. I'm going to do a couple quotes and I'll hand it over to the ladies because they have really amazing things to say about what they've been going through. Gandhi said, "Earth provides enough for every man's need, but not every man's greed." That's exactly what we're talking about here. Nobody needs a giant pile of money while everybody else are suffering and trying to figure out how to stay alive. It is health that is real wealth, not pieces of gold and silver, also Gandhi. MLK had some killer quotes. Matter of fact, go to D.C. and they got them all lit up on the wall. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. That's one of my favorites. But one of my also favorites is when we stood up against these guys in our neighborhood, we got no help. Matter of fact, our neighbors would run you over if you were out in the road. And so Martin Luther King says, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that silence is deafening. We can evade reality, but we cannot evade the consequences of evading reality. Ayn Rand. The question isn't who is going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. Also Ayn Rand. So when you're told that something's impossible, they said it would be impossible to go to Florida and convince the Republicans to ban it. This is the 5th year in a row. This year, the last 3 years, the ban bills are being written by Republicans, co-sponsored by majority Republicans, and they will pass a ban bill there, and that's a Republican in charge. I don't care who's in charge. I don't care what color, red or blue. I don't care what letter they have next to their name. You have to make everybody do our bidding. We are the bosses. This country is owned by us. They do our bidding or they get out. They are seat warmers, and remember that. You can be respectful to politicians for their public service, but when they're doing public disservice like our current government here, it's time to give them the boot. That's what we need to do. And I don't care whether we like them or not personally. Do you want me to announce who's coming up now, or is somebody else going to do it? Because PK's coming up. What's that? Yep. So what I'd like to do now, one thing I will tell you that's been phenomenal in the last 10 years of me doing this is I've met people that I didn't know from Adam 10 years ago that now I have their back and they have mine in this fight and struggle for our lives to do this. Amazing people I've met all over the country, especially in Pennsylvania, where I consider us one of the most oppressed for trying to just do the right thing here. PK and her neighbors have stood up against Mariner East 2. They They switched a pipeline on them that went from a pipeline that was going to Ohio, which was taken, the land was taken 80 years ago. All of a sudden, without notice, they flipped the direction of it, which is totally illegal. And then they decided instead of one pipeline that's got gasoline or jet fuel in it, that they would put 3 in with very dangerous natural gas liquids, which have a blast radius. You got 3 pipes in a row with a blast radius that's 1.5 times what a gas pipeline is in people's backyards, so close that their backyards collapsed and their patios started to fall in. The story they have to tell you about and the oppressive nature of our government is amazing. And that's why when you go in the trenches with people and you fight alongside of them, then you know these are friends for life. These are people that I will know forever. So I want to thank you for the time. Like I said, just keep fighting. They can't win. We just have to give up. We are all addicts. This was like a 12-step program. Hi, I'm Craig. I'm a fossil fuel addict. That's what we are. We just have to stop using their stuff and they collapse. I was told if one day a week we just stop buying gasoline in the whole country, the whole industry collapses. They can't have us stop buying. They're the pushers. If we stop taking their product and start making our own energy and making the money move in a different way that you're learning about, we win. And we don't have to fight. There's no bloodshed. You just stop buying their product. Thank you again, and I'll invite ladies up here to explain what's happening, unless you'd like to introduce.
Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
So the next 2 speakers are going to come up together. The first one is PK Diddy, who I have no idea what her real name is, but I've known her for quite some time, and she is one of the best, most active environmentalists I've ever met in PA. She is a water protector for life. She is also connected with people who fight to on Native American lands to have, their lands untouched. She is a analytical research chemist by training and environmental activist who is working to help educate communities being taken over by fracking pipeline industry and documenting it, sometimes by drone. And then we had a cancellation of a speaker, so we had a lovely woman take up the last-minute spot, which was so awesome. So thank you. It's Carrie Gross, and she is from Chester County. She's been impacted by Mariner East Pipeline Project and has become active in the fight against fossil fuel industry and climate change. So, ladies.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, I'm going to let Carrie go first. Thank you, everybody. Sure. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us today. I'm just going to share a little bit about myself, my story. 3 years ago, I would have never thought that I would be standing up here. I was a working mom. I had 6-month-old twins and a 2-year-old, and I was a registered Republican, and I only voted in presidential elections. I naively thought that our government was working on our behalf and in our best interest. I did not think that I would ever become involved in anything like this. I didn't think that my voice would ever have any sort of power, and I didn't really think I even needed to, because again, I thought that our government was on our side. 6 months later, in May of 2017, Mariner East came to my neighborhood in Exton, Pennsylvania, and I had already known it was coming, but didn't really know all the details. And then as soon as the construction started, learned more and more about it. as Craig kind of gave a brief introduction to it, Mariner East is a series of pipelines. It's natural gas liquids, highly volatile, and they're coming straight through our communities to all the way across the state, but to Delaware County, Marcus Hook, to be shipped overseas to be made into plastics. And as our community learned more and more about it, we learned that this is way more dangerous than your average pipeline. Many of us started out, myself sadly, but admittedly, thinking, let's reroute this. This isn't safe right here. Let's go put it, in the farmer's property or, somewhere else because it's less dangerous. But that quickly changed. And now I don't want it anywhere. And now I'm standing up here before all of you guys with PK. I live directly across the street from Mariner East, maybe 100 feet. I work on a property that has an easement for it, maybe 40 feet, and every single public school that my kids go to are within the immediate half-mile blast zone, so there's no getting away from this. In our community, I have mostly worked on educating people, and I think that's where my story is somewhat valuable because we all come from a different place, and we all need to work together towards the same goals. And if we only talked with like-minded people, as Craig said, our movement's not growing. And so I hope that we continue to plant seeds in other people so that we can get a Green New Deal and we can ban fracking and we can ban single-use plastics. And my children have a future, and they've become involved. They call Governor Wolf the bad wolf on their own. No prompting on my part. So we work together, a lot of social media stuff, documenting. We've knocked doors for elections. We've successfully flipped school board seats, board of supervisors in our townships, state rep, senators. Unfortunately, Governor Wolf, we did not have any success getting somebody in who would ban fracking. What's that? We just went to his office. Caleb awesomely got arrested as one of 11 people as an action at Governor Wolf's office. We showed up, about 50 of us, to demand that he halt Mariner now. He closed the doors. He was not there. He did send a staffer out at the very end to
he's hiding.
Yeah, to just give us a fake statement. And then Caleb and 10 others, thank you very much, stood behind and refused to leave and got arrested. So that was awesome.
Absolutely. So yes, we do a lot of social media together. Carrie and I. Hi, I'm PK. On Facebook, trying to get YouTube set up maybe one day. Right now, primarily Facebook. And the reason why is because it's a very easy social media platform for what I do, basically, which is going out and documenting the pipeline construction, as well as fracking. I've gone to Dimmock on one of Craig's tours, or Vera's tours. I've also gone to southwestern Pennsylvania and met with a mother who lost her child to Ewing sarcoma, which was very emotional and real. It's once you go and see these things, you cannot unsee it. It's very important that people open their eyes up to it and have these personal experiences with these people. That people that are going through it brings us together in ways that story brings us together. We can relate to it. I found it to be very effective. So Craig has been kicking it on that. Very, very good job he does, bringing legislators out to these places so that they can see, because they're making the decisions. How do you look at a mother who lost her child and then kind of go back and say, yeah, but this stuff's good for us, right? It's necessary, which kind of ties into one of the complications when you said we're canvassing. This is election season, We're dealing with, I'm not somebody who subscribes to a party. I kind of think I'm undeclared, it said, but I vote. We have recognized in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where we're fighting, where I'm from, the Mariner East, the unions, which it's funny, there's this game they play with us. I think it comes right to this modern MMT, is that the Democrats get money contributions from unions. And then the unions kind of tell them to be quiet, the campaigners, about the Mariner East, while there's people who are, I don't know, maybe like our friend David Manor, whose water looks like this, and they currently had just struck his aquifer for the second time yesterday. So, yep, he has no water. 30 homes lost their water. This is David Anspach, a Marine. Came home from Operation Enduring Freedom, or Afghanistan, and fought, which was a war for oil, pretty much, in my opinion. And he's fighting the industry who contaminated his well through the construction of this pipeline. So he has no water. He fought for the country. So it's really heartbreaking to see.
And he got sick.
And he got really
They did
sick.
not tell him that they hit his well until he got sick and was undergoing testing and doctors.
Kidney failure. Yeah, that's how bad it went. But he never stops documenting. It brings back, so we're seeing these unions that are putting pressure on our elected officials not to speak about something that is so traumatic to so many people in our area. And I asked why, like how many jobs are they really bringing to our area? It's not that many, actually. They actually have Texas, Louisiana, Wisconsin plates. They bring in workers from out of state, and they use these unions as like the push. And I'm trying to figure out like this economic issue we have. It's not necessary. We don't need these pipelines. And by the way, Philadelphia refinery just closed down because of this huge explosion. And they're finding out like we want to change, the community itself wants to change it to like a solar job training is part of the package they wanted. It's Philly Thrive, by the way, who does a really good job. Follow them. They have been fighting for a while too. And that's environmental injustice area. So we have a lot to talk about when it comes down to the economics. It's critical to understand what the actual problem is. And so here it was interesting. I didn't know what I was getting into a little bit coming here, but I actually really learned a lot about how the money's available. And here we're sitting here like arguing about, no, we can't save people's lives. We can't care about the health and safety of our communities because we need jobs. Like what jobs though? We've sat there with papers and evidence to our officials, and they still are just like, nope, can't speak against it because the unions will lose them in our campaigns. It's frustrating as an activist because I'm looking at like people's lives being torn apart, and it's like they don't exist to them. I mean, how do you? They go out. We've taken them on tours. These same people who. And they're like, oh, this is terrible.
Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman.
Yeah.
We're talking about you.
Yeah. And Wolf, he came and said he's not shutting this pipeline down in our faces after mothers pleaded to them. So I don't know what to do as a person. The only thing I knew how to do is use myself as a resource. The things I have that would be considered a resource in a movement, which is my science, understanding field work, documenting. And you know what? As a scientist, I just know that once you have video evidence and you have it very well and meticulously put together a timeline, when they lie to our officials saying, no, we didn't cause this, and the DEP stands behind them, because, I don't know, they don't even have any evidence. They have a scribble on the paper, rubber stamp. It's fine. They didn't contaminate this water. I go out and I help residents prove it. I mean, because once you have the evidence, it's really hard to, legally to argue. Even then, we've seen people who have to stand up against Goliath. We don't have money for lawyers, and it still becomes a frustration when they have a court in Pennsylvania where it's one judge who also worked for the industry. It's making rulings on our lives. So I always encourage people, look up the people who are running your state or running your county. Look at their background. Look at the judge before you go in, and call out conflict of interest before. Get your attorney to say something, at least it's on the record. Because we have to stop allowing them to control us and keep us where they want us. And it's in division. They want us to be divided. They want us to be fighting. And money is a great thing to fight about. We fight, in families they fight about money. Money is easy. What the Real Progressives is doing here is absolutely critical. And all the people that are watching here that know me, I really encourage you to look into it. Just look at the theory and see why it might make sense. And it does. It makes complete sense. The money is all there. They have to use it and stop bluffing, as they said.
We've been trying to highlight the donations, like who's accepting obviously fuel donations, signing the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge, who's running for our local government, who's accepted money from Energy Transfer, calling them out about it.
Yeah, it's actually caused a lot of division.
Yes.
I felt bad about it at first because we're calling out people who took money, and Then we have people like harassing us online. Like our Republicans are like making names. I have a hashtag. It said hashtag lock PK up or something. I was like, wow, like children. These are adults who are like attacking people who are trying to help others. That's really weird. So the money thing really causes a lot of divisions. How dare you take down the Democrats? Aren't you a liberal? I'm like, no. I mean, I don't know what I am. I'm PK. But so when it comes down to what we do and why it's so important, standing up, I educate my community because I'm trying to give them the power back. The only thing I know how to do with the resources I have is to give them the evidence. We don't have money for a hydrogeologist, but maybe if you do some certain things, I don't know, sign a contract, but not something that's going to bind you to something, get enough money, then go back and you get a geohydrologist and get your court case done. Or use people like us, document, learn to do it yourself. It gives the power back to the individual who has been traumatized, bullied, intimidated, and told they have nowhere to run or nothing to do. Nobody's going to believe you. Well, I'm pretty sure anybody speaks who knows me, I'm like, well, now they're starting to believe us. Like, you can't stop us. They put walls up where I go. It's funny. If there's nothing to hide, when I go and document and prove something, why are they putting walls up and tents? Like, why do you have to do that? There's something behind those walls. So we get a drone. Like, you're not stopping us. It's always outsmart them. There's so many resources in our community, and you don't have to be a person like me going out and documenting, but you can find a part of you. What have you done in all your life, and what could you contribute to your community to help this move along? We need nurses. We need like therapists. There's people in trauma that we need to really address a lot of topics, and we can only do that as a very strong, united community who's educated. That educated, meaning they have the time and energy and want to read about this, to understand it, and to have dialogue with their other neighbors.
Just sharing it with neighbors, sharing stories, talking about it. Planting more seeds. Each person you talk to, every time. I actually have the easement I was saying earlier right outside my work, and so I stare out the window 40 feet at it every single day, and I see patients, and every single patient that walks in my room says, what's going on out there? And so 8 to 10 people a day that filter through my room, I'm trying to educate, and people are always shocked. It's for plastics, it's not for energy, it's not for fuel, we're benefiting. And it's going literally through a little league field outside of my work. So there's questions on, is it safe for the kids to play baseball on afterwards? And
these things are just negated, right? All these things that we bring up, these complaints, are negated because of this job economic aspect. It's ridiculous. We have to wipe it out. We have to have that truth out there so people start. So once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you learn something, it might start to make sense in your brain and process and connect what you're seeing in front of you, the things we deal with out in Chester County and Delaware County daily, will start to make more sense. Like, it's that easy? We have the money? Like, we just have to learn our system better. And that's what I think this MMT is going to be doing for us. And it's important to start somewhere, and simply start by watching some of these videos that have been placed on Real Progressive's YouTube channel. I mean, just instead of going and watching TV that night, like, I don't know, something on Netflix, try watching one of these. It doesn't hurt. It will not hurt your brain. You'll be fine. You might even feel a little lighter afterwards. I mean, just try, And I need you. We all need you guys. We need everybody to do this together in a very synchronous motion forward.
Every single person can make a difference. I mean, we haven't stopped it, but we are making a difference. We have yet. We haven't stopped it yet. But we have candidates for office coming to us. We have elected officials coming to us. Mm-hmm. They realize that we have the power, and the
people have the power. Not the people in power.
The power of the people is stronger than the people in power.
Right. So, I mean, we just took the Republicans around the other day, and we had wonderful conversations, and I even found myself not opening up, to the other aisle and hey, they're human beings. They're kind of normal. When you start talking to them, you're like, why? Like, why are we so divided? There's so many similarities we have with each other. So I'm taking my personal effort is to start reaching out to, the ones that might scare me or have judgment about, releasing judgment and trying to be more objective when I walk into a personal conversation with somebody. You're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat in my eyes. You're a human being. And we're all in the same boat right now, so let's wake up.
And I'd like to just challenge everybody to find the time to do something. Everybody has excuses. We're all busy. But again, I have 3 small kids. I'm a single mom. I work 40 plus hours a week. And if I can find the time, 5 minutes a day, sending out a tweet or sharing something on social media, writing your elected officials, sending an email to your elected officials, obviously vote in Pennsylvania. It's Tuesday, November 5th, and vote for people who are committed to environmental causes. And
things like MMT, like getting them on board. We have to
transparency.
They have to understand.
Justice.
People have to understand this basis. The economics is what we get thrown up against all the time, and it always outweighs our safety and health, which is just so frustrating as a scientist. I'm like, what is this? And it doesn't make sense. So thank you to these guys for teaching me. I really thank you guys for inviting us here. Amazing lessons that I've learned. So I really appreciate it. And I'm definitely, I'm on board. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Keep fighting.
Any questions for them?
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry.
All right.
Mr. Stevens?
So let's hear about what kind of, first of all, if you guys have the same experience that we did, which is our own neighbors literally, not only don't they get it, they attack you, but then all of a sudden adding on the people that are doing the work and the companies themselves, even sicking our local law enforcement who are working off duty on us. If you run into the same thing, that's what we're going to do. I want to see what you guys are running into in your neighborhood.
Actually, yeah. So we just had we have our DA. There's this pipeline actually has 3 criminal investigations open right now. One through the AG and Delaware County's DA, and one through our DA in Chester County,
and civil as well.
And civil, right? Well, right now yes, to the officers. Yeah, we had some constables that came up and flashed their badge at one of our detectives, and he was not even from the area. He was a constable in another, and he was acting as an officer. So yeah, they're paying these guys off duty to come in and sit in a neighborhood and stare at people all day and tell them they're not allowed to be in public property, which we just walk by and we're like, yes, we can. But he was flashing it bad. So funny that he flashed it at another cop, and he's like, well, I got one up. And he flashed his, he's like, uh-oh. So they just got in trouble. They got charged, 2 people. So we see them attacking some of our, they get into the police. They give money. They donate to our police, to our schools. They're donating to school,
the food bank.
Food bank. They're taking that money and they're surrounding our community with it to make us feel like we are bound to that money. We need that money. And this is a good company. They're a good neighbor. Whatever. But yes. It's like a psychological thing, I believe. And they take over everything around you, like you've seen. Craig, did I answer that?
And we definitely have divisiveness among the neighbors as well, sadly. But on the opposite side, we have met amazing, wonderful people, and we have built a community of, I wouldn't have met PK 2 years ago, and I have so many neighbors that, we stop by each other's houses and, we're there for each other. So as much as it's pulled people apart, it's also more strongly united many of us. Of course, there's some who want us to be quiet and just let them get the pipelines in. But the thing that makes me laugh when people say that is we're not actually stopping them. We don't have that power. They continue to make mistakes. Right. We are just holding them accountable, and we are reporting their mistakes because they don't self-report.
So that's the thing, we capture them. That's why it's
right, but it's not
and
our.
Now it's actually, you didn't do this. Here's the image. So yeah, we absolutely do that. The divisiveness thing is causing trauma in our communities. That's something we do have. But it's funny because this is 4 years in the running. This thing, people's yards have been tore up for a couple of years now. So they were originally they're fine, and now they're screwing up so bad they did it to themselves. And those people who are fighting are now starting to see. When the DA started investigating a criminal, they're starting to be like, maybe you guys, you crazy people had something, you activists, you eco-terrorists, whatever. But, so.
What did you say? Accidental activist.
Accidental. Yeah.
Maybe not her, but.
Did that answer your question? Mr. Steve? Okay. Anybody else? Any more?
Thank you.
Fantastic, guys. Thank you so much.
All right.
So speaking of Lieutenant Governor, Fetterman, I actually interviewed him on my show the night before the PA primary. this was interesting. He hates me because he told me about the tour. I was like, do you realize people call you Frackerman? He's not a fan. I ran into him at a DEM event 2 weeks later, and I was like, hi, remember me? And he goes, yeah, I know who you are, and just walked away. I was like, okay. Good. Because I had to practically bully him to pull the words out of him. I don't support fracking. It took everything. And I was like, he finally said it. Does he mean it? I don't know, but he finally said it, and it's on video. So that counts for something. And then you also made me think of something. When we were protesting in Conestoga, when they were going over Native American land, we were standing there protesting all these construction workers who were building the pipelines, everything like that. And right beside, they had this like mailbox looking thing that you go and you take a paper out of, like when someone's selling homes. And I went up to go take one, and they said they would arrest me if I went over because it was on their line. So I couldn't even take a paper that shows what they're doing or anything like that. That should be public information.
The exact same thing happened to me, and they called the police on me and tried to get me arrested for trespassing.
See, that's incredible. They could move that 5 feet forward, let us take a pamphlet, but they wouldn't. It's a dangling carrot. We're just going to sit this right here, and if you try to take one, nope, calling the cops. That blew my mind. That's just bananas. So thank everyone so much for coming today. You guys are all amazing. We had amazing speakers, a musician, activists, like you guys all contributed something. So thank you all so much. We're going to close out with Mr. Stephen Grumbine, just for some final thoughts. And thank you all who are watching as well.
Thanks, Joy. Fadhel, would you mind coming up here with me real quick? So, first of all, I want to thank every one of you for riding out. This has been a long day, and it's an important day. I wish we could have had a larger turnout, but you know what? This is the first of many. So I want to make sure I thank you. I want to thank you, Mr. Schwartz. I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank you, sir. I want to thank you ladies back there. I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for being a partisan. Joy, thank you so much. But I really want to thank you, Fadhel. And I want to explain this in the most simple ways. You have said things in such concise, easy to understand fashion. I think you're the most complete MMTer for so many reasons, because you go far beyond academics. You go into the activist community. You bring people together even when you see them warring. You bring all peoples together. You are the best bridge of them all. And to me, I just want to say I love you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing all this great work, not just online, but also in person here, and bringing new friends to our community and, wonderful activists. So this is a movement. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. So with that, the last piece of this I want to say is, as a nonprofit, as a group trying to do great work, we're all out there trying to find ways to fund our efforts and everything. Obviously, sometimes that funding comes through just sweat equity, and I appreciate everyone coming in physical form. But we also are looking for people that want to contribute their time and actually lean in. We're not looking to poach people from other organizations. We're looking to build connections with you all. So there's so many ways to contribute. It's not just a financial thing. And I want to make sure everyone knows that being here, supporting us, being a part of this thing, and I want to say on the record, we have another video that we wanted to debut here for you all about the Green New Deal. And it was really a history of the New Deal going all the way back to FDR. Our videographer, Mindy Donham, she's also our graphic artist. She's done phenomenal work for us since the dawn of time. She's done our Macro and Cheese podcast logo. She's done our Real Progressives logo. She's done the logo, everything, every bit of art you see here. is courtesy of Mindy Donham, and I really want to make sure she gets a lot of credit for that. And, you know, I hope that you all will help us. My biggest ask out of all this is you all will help us make relationships with your organizations, that you all will help us become a part of your community. We've been an online community in a global way, and we haven't had the tentacles and the connections at the local level the way that we would like to have them. And so every state in America, we're going to ask the same of every activist community that we can bond with. We need your support, and we hope that you'll let us be a part of your community as well. So with that, I'm Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO, and all the other nasty stuff from Real Progressives. Have a great day, everybody. I'm out. Oh, and let me thank our hosts here as well. Harrisburg Unitarian Church, you guys, thank you so much for giving us this wonderful space. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. All right, with that, we're done.